The scariest thing that ever happened to me was on Halloween night of 1999. I remember it fell on a Saturday that year because I was a 22-year-old bartender at the time, and whenever Halloween fell on a weekend like that, you just knew you were in for a crazy night. Back then, I was living in Morgantown, West Virginia, so Halloween was always a big event for the college kids, especially the seniors who were old enough to buy booze. Each year, we ran costume competitions, came up with spooky-themed cocktails, played horror movies on the bar's TVs. It was a whole big event. But since Halloween was on a Saturday, the local crowd was going to be mixing with the college crowd, and it'd be one of the biggest Halloween parties the bar ever saw. Naturally, I'm pretty excited about this. So imagine my disappointment when, on the day itself, I get a call from my boss who had a huge favor to ask me. My boss and his partner owned a few different bars and restaurants, and one was down in Fairmont, about 50 miles south of Morgantown. Somehow, they'd come up incredibly short-staffed that Saturday, and my boss asked me to drive down there to work the evening shift as their bartender. I could have just said no, and he'd have just asked someone else to do it, but I knew that him owing me a favor like that would put me in a very, very good situation when it came to getting off time around Christmas. So, I said yes. I picked up the smartest shirt and slacks combo I could find, given that the place was way more upmarket than the bar I worked at, and then I drove down to Fairmont around 3:30 p.m. to set their bar up. I decided it wouldn't be so bad because since the place closed at like 11 p.m. and the kitchen staff said everyone was usually on their way out by 11:40, I figured I could just drive back home, then walk around to the bar to catch the last few hours of Halloween as a civilian. You know the deal. The shift at the restaurant dragged, but when it was finally over, I hopped back in my car and set off for Morgantown. Now what I should have done was take the 79 back, same way I've gotten down there before. But once I was in Fairmont, getting onto the 79 would have meant going back on myself, so I figured it'd be quicker to get onto the 19 and head back on a different route. That probably means nothing to people who don't know the area, so let's just say that I took a shortcut. The shortcut proved a big mistake in terms of route choice. The roads were much more winding and considerably less well lit, so anytime I made up and not doubling back on myself was lost trying to drive as safely as I could. I made it about 80 to 90% back to Morgantown, still driving super carefully, and I'm literally just considering what a dangerous stretch of road I'm on when this other car comes into my headlights. It's off the road, on a patch of grass, not moving, and the passenger door is open. Reaching into the passenger door is a guy who briefly shoots me this look as I drive past him, one that makes me think that he might have needed help. I could have just kept driving, pretending that I didn't see anything and made it back to Morgantown with time to spare. But part of me knew that I'd feel like a total douche the next day, just leaving someone stranded at the side of the road when all I could think about was myself. So I slowed down, pulled a U-turn, and drove back to see if the guy needed any help. I'm not gonna lie, it did occur to me that going back might have been a bad idea. It was Halloween after all. Creepiest night of the year, but I figured if I pulled up and the guy looked like an axe murderer, I could just reverse the heck out of there and speed off before they turned my skin into a mask or something. I knew that the person was wearing a white short-sleeved shirt of some kind, so I cut my eye out for it as the car came into my headlights again. But as I pulled up, they were nowhere to be seen. There was someone in the passenger seat though, so I kept a bit of a distance, opened up my car door, leaned out, then called over to her to see if she was okay. She didn't reply. She kept staring off into the near distance like she couldn't hear me. She looked okay, so I got out of my car to walk over to her, but with each step I took towards the car, I realized more and more that something wasn't right about the woman I was looking at. It was the look in her eye, this glassy, half-awake look, and before I even got over to open the door, I realized that she might not even be conscious. If I'd have parked my car up at another angle, I'd have seen it way before I got close to her, but it took me until I was within touching distance of the car to realize that she was dead. Someone had stabbed her over and over again in the stomach, groin, and thighs. Her t-shirt was a dark color that didn't really show it, but her jeans were just completely drenched. I couldn't quite believe what I was looking at for a second. I mean, there was just so much blood, so much it was dripping off the seat and onto the floor of the car. I don't know if that's where she died or if someone had posed her in the seat like that, but I remember how frighteningly peaceful she looked. Not peaceful like content, peaceful like she'd just chosen to give up at some point. I remember actually being frozen for what felt like a good few seconds, but that could be my mind just pumping with adrenaline, making it feel like it was longer than it was, because it sure did feel like I'd been standing there for too long when another thought occurred to me. Where was the guy that I saw in the white shirt? I can still remember how the question made my flesh creep, and I'm not just saying that as a means of conveying how scared I was. I could actually feel it. It was like I could actually feel the terror running through me, and as I turned back to my car, I prayed that I wouldn't see him standing near it, blocking the route to my escape. I couldn't see it, but you gotta remember that I'd left my car running with the headlights on, and you better believe that I was looking at those dark patches around the lights thinking he could be right there, and I'd never know it. Just looking over my shoulder made me feel incredibly exposed and vulnerable, so I turned back towards the car, only to see something that made me jump out of my skin. There was a tree line maybe only 10 to 15 feet away from the car, and even with my night vision ruined by the glare of the headlights, I saw something pale shift among the tree trunks. It was the white shirt. It had to be. He was watching me from the darkness. I'm still not 100% certain that was the case, but I didn't stick around to find out. If my worst suspicions were true, and the guy had stabbed that poor girl to death, there was no telling what he'd do to me in the name of eliminating a witness. I just ran back to my car and put my escape plan into action, feeling a deep sense of relief when I finally put the pedal to the metal. And needless to say, I didn't end up going out that night. I just drove back to my apartment, called the cops, then spent the next few hours either on the phone with dispatch, waiting for the cops to arrive at my place, then telling them what I'd seen when they finally arrived. I told them what kind of car I thought it was, what the woman looked like, the exact stretch of road that I was on at the time, and when they're done taking notes, they relay everything I'd said to their higher-ups. And from what I can gather, the goal was to get another patrol car to head out of town to find where I was talking about, but since it was a Halloween weekend, the department didn't have anyone to spare. That's when they asked me if I minded taking a ride with them to show them the exact location where the car was. If I'd gone off-road, there was a chance that it had left tire tracks, and if they really were dealing with a murderer, then the kinds of tires used on the car could end up being the difference between a conviction and an acquittal. And that's why they needed my help. They weren't so much looking for the car, which they figured would be gone already since I'd stumbled across the scene. They needed the exact spot it had been stopped at so they could potentially take an impression of the tires. Once that was explained to me, I had no problem giving up my time. If my testimony was going to be the difference in catching a guy and having a killer on the loose, the choice was an obvious one. So I followed the cops downstairs and climbed into the backseat of their cruiser. They were right about the car not being there, but I did manage to retrace my steps, so to speak, until I was looking at the exact patch of grass and trees where the car had been. After that, we had to wait a while until another unit showed up to secure the scene, but eventually, I got a ride back to my apartment, even if it was way after all the bars closed, and let me tell you, I've never needed a drink so much in my entire life. Thankfully, my coworkers and boss were still at the bar I worked at, hanging out after closing time and enjoying a few drinks of their own. I stopped by, they let me in, and boy did I have a scary Halloween story for them that night. I managed to get a few sympathy beers out of it, and they did a great job of taking the edge off, but going back to my apartment on my own was a different story. I didn't have any nightmares about finding that woman, but it definitely played on my mind for a long time afterwards. The cops only called me once to confirm a few details about the car and the guy I'd seen, but following that, I didn't hear a thing about it aside from a few pieces on the local news. I still think about it though, all this time later, especially around October and November each year. I wonder if the cops ever caught the guy, if he actually killed the girl or was just trying to get her to the hospital after someone else attacked her. Sometimes I think I really do see a ghost every Halloween, just not in the sense people might expect. I'm not haunted by some translucent spirit floating around dark corridors. Instead, I'm haunted by that look on the woman's face. The one that looked almost like she'd given up on life. The one that made her look like death didn't scare her anymore.
This happened when I was 11 years old. I was trick-or-treating with two of my friends, who I will call Tom and Jerry. It was towards the end of the night, and most of the trick-or-treaters had already gone home. We decided to hit one more house before calling it a night. The house that we stopped at looked like it had been abandoned for years, but there was a lit jack-o'-lantern on the front steps, so against our better judgment, we decided to proceed. There were a bunch of scratch marks all over the front door. But before we could knock, we heard a loud scream coming from inside the house. It didn't sound like a distorted scream from a Halloween decoration. It sounded like a genuine scream of terror. The door then slowly creaked open, and a decrepit hand emerged from the darkness, reaching out for us. We then heard what sounded like a witch's laugh. My friends and I fled from the house, hearing footsteps running behind us and a haunting voice calling out,
"Come and get your candy, my children."
We ran all the way back to Tom's house. We had no idea if we were still being followed. Jerry and I decided to stay the night because we didn't want to risk going back out again. I woke up at around 2 a.m. and I heard that same laughter. I looked over and I saw something smeared across the bedroom window. I woke up Tom, and he looked.
It looks like an egg.
Thinking that someone was egging his house, me and him went downstairs, and immediately noticed that one of the windows that faced the street was broken. Tom's parents weren't home at the time. Jerry then came rushing down the stairs. "What's happening, guys? I heard someone laughing outside." From outside the door, we then heard someone say,
"You forgot your candy, my children."
We all then rushed to the nearest window and saw a deranged-looking woman grabbing a pumpkin from Tom's front porch and then hurling it at the door. The insane woman started screaming like a mental patient. As she ran to the front door and started banging and kicking on it. We fled the house through the back door and made our way to my house, which was only down the block. We woke up my dad, and after telling him what was going on, he called the cops. The police arrived a short time later, but they did not find the crazy woman. The day after all this happened, November 1st, Tom called me.
"Hey, man, that crazy lady left some candy on the back porch, and there was a note that said I should eat it. My parents took her to the police station, and they found a bunch of thumbtacks in all the candies. I also overheard the cops talking to my parents, and I heard something about finding dead bodies in that old, creepy house we were at last night."
The next Halloween, we saw that same house being torn down. Apparently in the basement of the house, they found a bunch of knives, ropes, and tapes. That crazy woman wasn't found until 2 years later. Apparently, she had been living in the woods behind that house. To everyone out there listening, please be safe this Halloween, and always check your candy.
This happened a few years ago on Halloween. I'm 28 years old, and most people in my friend group get together for a Halloween party the weekend of Halloween. On this year, Halloween was on a weeknight, so our party was later in the week. That meant I didn't have anything going on Halloween. I live in a smaller house and was just planning on hanging out and giving out candy to trick-or-treaters all night. By the time it got to be about 5 o'clock, the first trick-or-treaters arrived. I would say my neighborhood is pretty average. I don't get a crazy number of people, but a steady amount throughout the night. As time went on, the sun set a little after 6 o'clock or so. It was around this time when I was in my living room and heard a knock on the front door. It was a strong and powerful knock. Most people rang the doorbell, so I really noticed this. I was a little bit slow to get up and get to the door, and by the time I did, nobody was there. I felt bad because some kid must have missed out on getting candy from me, and I meant to answer the door a little bit sooner. I looked around to see if I could see anybody walking down the street, but I didn't. After that, I went back inside. I got a few more kids at the door over the next hour or so. Once again, there was another loud knock on the door after that. I was much quicker to answer the door, but again, nobody was there. Now I was beginning to think that I was being pranked or something. When it got later in the night, it happened yet again. It was the only time people knocked on the door, too. Everybody else would just ring the doorbell, so I knew when I heard the knock, whoever had done it would be gone by the time I answered. The last trick-or-treaters came by at about 8:45 or so, and by 9 o'clock, things were really quiet. At that point, I turned my lights off, signaling that I wouldn't want any more trick-or-treaters. It was about 9:30 when I heard the knocking yet again. I ran to the door and opened it as fast as I could. Still, nobody was there. I was pretty annoyed by this now. Who would have time to repeatedly knock on my door over the span of 3 or 4 hours just to run away before I could answer? I left my house and took a couple of steps out into my yard looking all around. I didn't see anybody. I called out asking who was there, but of course got no response. I shook my head and started walking back into my house. When I reached my front step, I suddenly heard a noise in the bushes directly in front of my house and to my right. When I looked, I was just in time to see somebody emerge from the bush and was headed straight for me. This person was a grown man, and I had never seen him before. I had maybe 10 feet between him and the front door. I ran as fast as I could, pretty much just as a reaction. When I reached the door, I swung it back open and got inside. I closed the door right behind me, and it closed right on the man's arm who was trying to get inside after me. This was just my screen door, so it didn't hurt him too bad, but it was enough to cause him to remove his arm from the door and back outside. This gave me enough time to slam the larger door and lock it, right before he opened the screen door and tried coming into my house. I screamed that I was calling the police, and then got my phone out of my pocket to do so. I looked out the window, and I watched the man running away through my yard and then down the street, but I called the police anyways. When they arrived, I told them all I could, and this was thankfully enough to keep the man away, because I never saw him again. When I was in college, Halloween was always a big time for parties and such. During my junior year, I shared a house with a couple of my roommates who were some girls I had met and become good friends with during my freshman year. All of us had a bunch of our friends over to our place for a Halloween party, which was a total of about 20 or 30 people. Our house was small, but we did have 2 floors, but it was basically a typical old house you would find in a college neighborhood. Our university was pretty big, so I'm sure there were a bunch of other parties going on that night as well. We all wore costumes, and I recognized most of the people, even though they were wearing disguises. At about 10 p.m., most of us wanted to go out to the local bars in the college town. We all started to leave, but there was this one guy who I had no idea who he was. He was dressed as the Joker from Batman, but he had on a mask instead of painting his face, so I couldn't recognize him at all. I went over and asked him who he was, but he didn't answer me. He just kind of looked at me and then sort of walked away. There was music playing and other people talking, so maybe he didn't hear me, is what I thought. Eventually, I went upstairs to get my wallet and keys, and when I came down, most of the people were gone, aside from my roommates and I, who were all set to leave. We left the house and locked up. Then we were able to walk to the bars because they were only a few blocks away. I was out for maybe 2 or 3 hours. I remember I think it was a Thursday, and I had class the next morning, so I decided to go back a little after midnight. I didn't want to be out too late, and my roommate Liz and I walked back together. Our other roommates said they would come back later. When we got back, I unlocked the door and went inside first. As soon as I did, I heard a noise from inside. I realized quickly that it was coming from the inside of the closet we had just in front of the stairs. I walked over and opened the door. When I did, I saw the guy who was dressed as the Joker, but his mask wasn't on now. I could clearly see that he was an older looking guy, like in his 50s, and I had no idea who he was. Before any of us had a chance to do anything, I slammed the door back and immediately ran away. Liz saw me running, and we both went outside. I called the police, and we began walking right down the street in the direction we had came from. We later went back when the police were there, and we were told that the man was now gone. Our entire house was searched, but they couldn't find him. I guess he had been able to get away. I'm not sure how he knew to go into our house, but apparently he had hidden in the closet while we were leaving. It's really creepy that he was hiding in our house alone the whole time we were gone. We must have caught him off guard when we got back, and he went to quickly hide in the closet. I'm glad I heard him, or else who knows what would have happened. This story happened many years ago when I was a kid. I think I was 11 years old. I remember that for Halloween every year, I would usually go trick-or-treating with some friends, and then we would hang out afterwards. On this year, I was planning to trick-or-treat with my friend Tyler, and then he was going to come over and hang out at my house afterwards. My house was sort of big, and we had a cool basement with a big TV for playing video games or watching movies. We also talked to our friend Alex at school earlier in the day, and he was planning on coming over that night, but he had to go trick-or-treating with his sister, so he wasn't going with us. When the night arrived, Tyler and I went all around our neighborhood and beyond it to the surrounding neighborhoods. We were out until about 9, and we got tons of candy. Then we walked back to my house where my parents were. Tyler and I went down into the basement and played some video games while we waited for Alex to get there. This was before the days where every kid had a cell phone, so we didn't know exactly when he would be there. We left the back door to the basement unlocked for him to come through though. My parents were watching a movie upstairs, and we were down in the basement for about 20 minutes or so when we heard the back door open and shut. It was around the corner from the room we were in, and we assumed that it was Alex arriving. I called out to where we were and told him to join us. However, I didn't hear Alex respond. I got up and walked out to the hallway near the back door. Nobody was there. It was weird because I was so sure that I had heard the door open and shut. I went back and asked Tyler if he had heard the door, and he told me yes, he heard the exact same thing that I had. I looked all around the basement once more, but nobody was there. I thought maybe Alex had opened the door, but then decided to go around to the front or something, and I went back to playing video games with Tyler. Only 5 minutes or so after this, I thought I heard somebody walking around in the hallway, and then I heard another door open and shut. The basement living room area where we were was completely out of vision of the back door and hallway with some guest bedrooms in it. It sounded like one of the bedroom doors had shut. I got up and walked over, and when I did, I saw one of the doors was in fact shut. I couldn't quite remember exactly if it had been open or closed before, but I was pretty sure it was open. I was sort of creeped out now and went back to tell Tyler about it. Just then, I heard the back door open and shut again. Then I heard Alex's voice. I walked out and saw him standing in the doorway. He asked me what was wrong when he saw the look on my face. I didn't say anything until all three of us were in the living room together, and then we told him all about what had happened. I decided I would go up and find my parents and tell them about everything, but before I did, we once again heard the back door open and then close. I walked out and saw the bedroom door that had been shut was now wide open. I ran to the back door and locked it quickly, and then ran upstairs and found my parents. My dad came downstairs and looked around. Then he went outside. After doing so, he came back in and said he couldn't see anything that looked out of sorts. I never saw who was in the house that night, but it creeps me out to think about it every time.
Back when I was still a junior in high school, me and my cousin used to volunteer with the local church, and every Halloween, we'd act as chaperones for the younger kids so they could trick-or-treat in safety. It was a pretty good gig, if I'm honest. Most people whose homes you stop at recognize you were the chaperone and offer you a piece of candy or two, which meant you could still cop some free candy despite being way too old and out of costume. We'd been chaperones during our sophomore year, so we knew how much free candy you could get, and since we didn't have anything better to do on the next year's Halloween, me and my cousin figured we'd volunteer again. Just like the first year, we took charge of about 4 third graders each, then walked them around the neighborhood, knocking at any houses that had decorations outside. We head up this one cul-de-sac and we start working our way around the circle of houses when I notice an older kid sitting on the porch of a house across from us. He was maybe about 12 or 13, older than the kids we had with us, but definitely younger than we were, and he's just mad dogging us from across the street. He did not look happy to see us there at all, and I even gave my cousin a nudge to be like, "What's that kid's problem?" We agreed to maybe not knock at that kid's house on the way out of the cul-de-sac, as we definitely didn't want some sort of confrontation occurring. But in the meantime, we could still knock at other homes so the kids could get some candy. My group had just finished up at one home and was in the process of leapfrogging my cousin's group when I heard a snapping sound coming from the other side of the street. Having not recognized what the sound was, I had no urgency about me as I turned to see where it was coming from. But when I did, I could feel the blood draining from my face. The angry-looking kid from the other side of the street was in the middle of reloading one of those break-barrel air guns, and I started to panic as I realized that he might have hit one of the kids in my group. And that's when the screams started. My head whips around to see a little girl who's in the middle of unleashing the most ear-splitting scream I'd ever heard. She's pointing at another kid, one dressed as the blonde girl from that Frozen movie, who had a hand over her eyes with blood dripping out from underneath it. I remember going to complete panic mode. Not so much because of the kids were hurt or even that her injury seemed like it was really bad. It was because I'd already seen the kid reloading. He didn't just shoot and run away. He wanted to keep shooting. My first thought was to tell the kids to run for cover, but before I could even get a word out, they were scattering in different directions. Meanwhile, my cousin had been wise enough to the kid shooting pellets at us from the moments he fired the first shot, and the kid only barely got another pellet into the barrel before my cousin just slammed into him. Both of them were sprawled out on the ground for a second. Then just before I ran away to help, my cousin wrenches the air gun away from the kid and starts beating the life out of him. I mean, absolutely knocking the snot out of this kid over and over again. What came next was just total chaos. People were coming out of their houses, drawn by the sound of the screams. Most didn't seem to know what was going on, and even tried to get my cousin off the shooter before he started yelling back at him about how he was the one who'd stopped the shooting. The cops took way too long to show up because there was no initial reports of gunshots or anything. That, and I guess they were super busy with it being Halloween. The EMTs showed up first, and it was while the little Frozen girl was being treated that I learned her injuries weren't that bad. I thought the little pellet the kid had fired had taken the poor thing's eye out. It turns out, it had struck her just around her eyebrow, and although there was a nasty gash, she hadn't been blinded, thank God. Once the injured girl had been taken off to the hospital and I had made about a dozen phone calls to a dozen different people, I finally led the kids back to our church, leaving my cousin to wait for the cops while still sitting on the shooter. My cousin said the whole time his biggest worry was the shooter's kids' parents appearing, but he was in that cul-de-sac for just over an hour, and not only did they not show up, but no one seemed to know who or where they were. He told me that after the cops arrived, they arrested the kid, asked him a few questions, and he passed on my cell number so they could talk to me too. I didn't realize it until talking to them, but I don't think I'd taken the time to properly process what had happened. So as I was breaking down what I'd seen before the kid fired, I ended up breaking down too. Like I said, the shooter was only maybe 12 or 13 years old, meaning he probably is either in juvie or some kind of program as I'm writing this. I know kids his age can be mindlessly and thoughtlessly cruel, and that in opening fire on that little Frozen girl, he hadn't properly thought through his actions. But I remember being that age, and I can't imagine having the hatred or malice in me to do anything like shoot an air gun at a little girl's head. It's no surprise to me that his parents weren't around, and I'm not trying to excuse his actions, but I've always wondered what the kid's home life was like for him to even think about hurting someone like that. I hope he was punished, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I hope that kid gets the help he needs. Not so much because I feel particularly bad for him, which to be fair I do, is because if he doesn't get help, that little girl might not only be the innocent young female he ends up hurting.
A few months ago, I was partaking in one of my many late drives. I usually just drive around if I'm stressed or go sit by the water to clear my mind, and it's a total mental health saver. Anyways, after about partway through my drive, I decided to go park at the entrance to a popular walking trail. I figured it was late, so nobody would be there to complain about me blasting my music or relaxing in my car. Note that you drive to the trail by taking a narrow and bumpy dirt road, and the speed limit is 20 kilometers per hour. But it's full of massive potholes, so you usually have to drive pretty slow or you'll screw up your car. After navigating the narrow pothole-ridden road like an expert pilot, I arrived at the parking lot in one piece. But much against what I expected, there were 5 or 6 cars spaced out along the parking lot's edge and one closer to its center. This on its own isn't too out of the ordinary. However, it was close to 2 a.m. at this point, so I was a little creeped out, but it didn't really faze me. After I found a spot close to the middle, I noticed that none of the cars had any lights on, not inside or out. This was odd, as I'm pretty sure people don't usually go for group walks at 2 a.m., and if someone was sitting in them, you'd see the center console lights or something else light up at the very least. After all, who wants to sit in complete darkness? Not giving it much more thought, I cranked up my music and laid back while staring at the sky. Nothing happened until 20 minutes later. Like clockwork, car engines came to life and headlights cut through the dark. Each car except for the one by the entrance left in a line as if connected by a chain. At this point, I felt like something was off. It just didn't make sense. After seeing the line of cars leave, I figured I should head home myself. So I started up my car and began backing out of my parking space. As I did, the last car's high beams came on. This made it so that I couldn't see what I was doing, and it annoyed me. So I finished pulling out, a little too quickly, and went to the road. The other car followed. As I slowed down to avoid the potholes, the other car sped up. This continued until they were directly behind me. Keep in mind, I still couldn't properly see as they left their high beams on. This freaked me out, so I decided to speed up drastically. And as expected, the car behind me did the same. At this point, I was traveling down the narrow road at about 60 kilometers per hour, while gritting my teeth over all the expensive sounds coming from my poor car. But the car was still tailgating me. I began to freak out, slamming my gas pedal into the floorboard and attempting to speed off. But to no one's surprise, this didn't seem to shake them. We were no longer on the narrow road at this point, but rather a connecting road to the main one. I was scared. I needed to think of something fast, or I might end up on a milk carton or some missing person report, and that was all I could think about. Then I saw it. Up ahead, there was a sharp turnoff onto an area that overlooks the water. Think of it like a deep shoulder that you can park in while facing the lake. This was the perfect place for me to loose the car behind me. As I got closer, I continued to speed up. I was traveling at well over 80 kilometers per hour. Then, once I got a couple meters away, I slammed on my brakes and turned my wheel as sharp as I possibly could, almost ending up in the bushes. As I did so, the other car shot past me and continued down the road. I felt so relieved. After gathering myself, I pulled out and drove down to the intersection to go home. I was home free and coming down off of an adrenaline rush higher than the CN tower. Finally, the light turned green and I could go. But as I did, I saw the car driving down the side street that went to the water, and it sent chills through my spine. What if I stayed there rather than driving back? What did these people want from me? I'm truly glad I never had the opportunity to find out. Back when I was about 16 years old, because of my living situation at least twice a month, I'd have to make a 2-hour drive from a city area back to my parents' house in a rural area. I'd say about 90 minutes of that drive was just country road with nothing but valley, corn, or some other crop on either side with the occasional farmhouse, or something that you think people might go in and out of willingly along the way. Because of how used to this drive I'd already been beforehand, I didn't think much of driving that long stretch of no cell service, no phone booth area. Nothing had happened yet, so surely nothing would happen ever. Right? In the middle of one of those drives back, while the night was slowly taking over as I was driving, I saw a flash of light. That was weird. Maybe just a momentary anemic moment. Another flash. Well, maybe someone coming this way has their high beams wonky or something. Another flash. All right, something's wrong. I slow down a bit so as not to get blinded periodically and swerve off the road and try to figure out what was ahead. Further in the distance, I think I see a person. Actually, multiple. My eyesight's well and good at this time in my life, so I was putting two and two together, getting close enough to realize there were 4 people on this shitty country road lined up across it as if it to make a roadblock to prevent any cars from passing through. Another note to this is that I don't see any car around them that they could have come in. Don't remember any farmhouses or sheds nearby either. The rest of this encounter felt like it took place in the span of an hour because of my anxiety, but it was likely no more than 5 minutes in hindsight. I'm driving maybe 10 miles per hour now as I'm getting closer and realizing that I'm definitely without a doubt approaching a line of 4 grown-ass people with huge bright white masks on staring in my direction. 2 of them definitely have bats, or some other distinctly long blunt objects, and 1 person is holding something that the flashes are coming from. I've seen enough horror movies and heard enough stories about crimes on roads like this to think in that moment I only have 2 options. Slow down and hope they eventually part way around my car, running the risk that they could very well get the jump on me in my dinky car, or pick up the pace and disregard whether or not they'll have the chance to move out of the way when I potentially accelerate through them. I decided the latter. I had no means to protect myself with other than a bat in the trunk of my own car, and at the time I was a young teen who could easily get knocked down with a solid slap because of my build, and my car was shit enough to where if I stopped I wouldn't doubt someone could break in with easy force. Now, hearing gravel and dirt kick up from under my tires, I was more freaked out at the potential I could drive myself off the road along with taking out some strangers, who I am now dead certain are carrying bats as I accelerate towards them. I'm proper freaking out, but I've accepted that this was the decision I made from the adrenaline of fear of any situation. I accelerated more, and thankfully the 2 that were directly in my way lunged out of the way just in time to not get hit. I stop accelerating to catch my breath and see them in my rearview mirror. The other 2 for some reason trying to haul ass towards my car as if they could catch up, and it became so real in that moment that there were people who were intentionally trying to get the jump on me in the middle of nowhere. Probably not just kids trying to get the kicks and giggles out of freaking someone out, but real adults trying to harm someone that came that way. I just focused on driving out of there as fast as I could. I focused on going forward, didn't turn the radio back on to distract me, and felt shook by the experience in general. The most up part, honestly, was getting home and realizing that part of what I was driving on wasn't gravel. It was nails that were now embedded into my tires. Praise whatever God may be out there for me somehow having those sturdy tires. I didn't tell my parents the full story about what happened, and they just assumed I was being reckless and someone was playing a prank. I told the story to some of my friends, and they told me I probably wasn't in any serious situation, and they were just trying to get a scare out of me, especially since being in a car was a pretty big advantage in the situation, which I can't deny. Still, creeped the absolute hell out of me, and I remember it every single time I drive down a road that looks any type of similar. I live in a county that was pretty rural until the last 10 years. The biggest town in our county is pretty crowded now. Overcrowded, and I hate it. I moved from there to the countryside. I like where I live, except it can be really creepy at night because for miles and miles it's dark without any streetlights. One thing about this county is that the main roads always get backed up real quick. Either there's an accident or whatever, so it pays to go the back roads. The back roads, like any other rural place, are less populated, dark, and have lots of trees. Anyway, a few years ago something happened that almost made me stop using them. I was driving home kinda late one night. I decided to take one particular back road that shaved off 10 minutes from my commute home. I was tired and had to get up early, so I was going fast trying to get home soon. This road is a little more populated than some, but it is super spooky in some stretches because there are huge trees alongside the road and their branches and leaves make a tunnel of sorts. So I'm zipping through and round a curve. Up ahead I see what I thought was a giant garden flag. You know, the flags that people put up in spring in their yards. Well, I thought it was a weird flag because it seemed like it was fairly tall and large, and it was in the middle of the road. As I get closer, my headlights hit it, and it's not a flag. It is a person. A lady. She was wearing a red fez. I live in rural Maryland. You just don't see a fez every day. A long, flowy white dress and an orange reflective sash across her chest. A little strange because she's in the middle of the street. As I drove past her, it got weirder. As dark as it was, as I drove by, I could see she was about 60. She had glasses, and I could see her bright blue eyes. She looked in my passenger window, and she started doing this weird bounce thing. I thought she was going to try and get into my car. Mind you, I'm going pretty fast. I don't know what it was about her, but she freaked me out. I didn't think she would rob me. I really thought she was a soul snatcher or a skinwalker. I honestly didn't think she was human. I can't adequately describe how creepy she was. I sped past her as fast as I could. I kept glancing in my back seat to make sure she had not materialized in my car. I prayed, recited scripture, and kept watching my rearview mirror. It was spring, so a little warm, but I felt bone-chillingly cold. I finally make it home and I run in to tell my mom the story. I got in just as my brother was telling my mom about this weird lady he saw as he was driving. It was the same lady, but he saw her at the intersection from the highway and the back road, whereas I saw her further down the road. We both had the same reaction. She also tried looking in his car. She was also bouncing around when he saw her. He said there was a car in front of him that sped off when they drove past the lady. My brother was so freaked out that he won't travel that road anymore, even during the day. Eventually, I found out that the lady lives in the woods. Apparently, at one time, her family lived on that road. Her father was ill, and she tried to take him to the hospital. He died on the way there, and she drove around with his body in her car for hours. I guess she has mental health issues, and I think she lost the house or got kicked out. I have friends that live off of that street, so when I was talking about it, they knew exactly who it was. I still go on that road, but I haven't seen her since. I do hope she's okay, but I really do not want to run into her again.
This took place in 2017 when my girlfriend and I were visiting her aunt in Seoul, South Korea. Her aunt always enjoyed big cities and the culture they had, even though it got tiring at times. Seoul was also a major hotspot for tourists, which meant that it was busy wherever you went. However, that didn't seem to bother her aunt that much. Anyway, we were staying at her apartment for about a week before we went back home. One night during our stay, my girlfriend and I decided that we'd go out for dinner for a little date night. I'm American and my girlfriend is obviously Korean, so I wasn't familiar with the food, nor have I even tried it. She had recommended we go to this restaurant that served really good food along with popular dishes throughout Korea. The restaurant was located in the more rural parts of the city, which was about a 45-minute drive. That being said, we hop into her aunt's car and start driving to the location. Fast forward about 30 minutes or so later, I remember us driving by some small rice fields when my girlfriend notices something up ahead. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but we then came to the conclusion that it was a person. Because of the light from the moon, we can see that he's waving his arms up in an attempt to stop us. My girlfriend obviously stops and he approaches the car while hyperventilating. In a very panicked voice, he starts saying things in Korean that I obviously didn't understand. She begins talking to him and she translates by telling me that he had gotten lost on a hike. He had claimed that he needed a ride back to his town and asked us to help. My girlfriend, being the nice person she was, told him to hop in the back and that we'd drive him. We think nothing of it when we see what appeared to be two other people hiding in the tall grass. Now, I wasn't sure what my girlfriend heard, but she swore one of them said "oh shit" in Korean. This was clearly due to the fact that we had saw them, and that's when the man gets this shocked look on his face. The lights inside the car revealed his face to be bright red, as if he knew we were catching on to something. However, before he was able to do anything, my girlfriend pretends to be on the phone and makes up an excuse that we had to leave. His demeanor completely changed as if he were disappointed. At that point, we weren't sure what was going to happen, but we didn't want to stick around. My girlfriend turns the car around and we drive off, not looking back. Right then, we knew that whatever their intentions were weren't good and that we shouldn't stay there a second longer. Our dinner date was obviously canceled that night, but we never did tell her aunt about it. South Korea is known to be very safe, so the chances of something like this happening were rare. A month later, my girlfriend's aunt saw a news report of 2 people gone missing near the area where we saw the men. The news had said it was because the 2 were drunk and had spread out, but I've always wondered about that. I'm still not sure if what we encountered was some sort of ambush or trap or just people pulling some prank. Even with both of those scenarios in my head, I still feel that the second one is a bit too optimistic. I've never been back to Korea since, and neither has my girlfriend. When I was around 18, I had just graduated from high school and bought a new car as a graduation gift to myself. It was a used car, but it was still in great condition with plenty of mileage to get me from point A to point B. I remember enjoying the car so much that I even drove it around my town with friends and whatnot. Sometimes I'd have to go through many challenges in my life to the point where I'd take long night drives to ease my mind. Most people think that music or weed would help you calm down, but I found driving alone to be very much relaxing. Having that alone time to yourself to clear your mind was better than any music genre or drug. Out of context, my dad is a heavy drinker and would sometimes come home and start fights with my mom or I. This often results in me getting frustrated and going out on those late night drives to ease myself. Needless to say, my family is extremely dysfunctional in many aspects. One night, I had just gotten home from work to find both my parents arguing as always. Needing to get some air and wanting to remove myself, I hop in my car and drive around the town to clear my mind. I live in a small town in Upper Massachusetts, which is known to be one of the safest towns in the US. It was a quiet night, and I'm driving down the road just admiring life itself when I see something in the middle of the road. I stop my car and I see, out of all things, a baby car seat sitting in the road. At first I thought that it could have been a broken baby seat that someone had just threw out, but it seemed too random. Who throws out a baby car seat out onto the road at 2 a.m.? That being said, I step out of my car and begin to hear faint crying coming from it. At this point, I'm so confused as to what to do, as I've never been in a situation like this. Mind you, this was during the beginning of fall, so it got decently cold at night. I casually step toward the baby seat, and that's when the crying immediately stops. I ever so slowly removed the blanket and see that it wasn't a baby, but a doll. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach when I saw what I was looking at. As my mind created these thoughts and what this meant, I looked to my left and see a black figure peer their head out from behind a tree. With the very small amount of light from my car, I was able to faintly see their face. Now, I'm not sure if this was because I was tired or because I was scared, but their face appeared to be contorted. Without hesitation, I get back in my car and drive around the baby seat and back home. I'd say I was out for a good hour or so, as when I got home, both my parents were asleep. I didn't get a minute of sleep that night, as my mind still couldn't process as to what I saw. I thought about going to the police about it, but I knew that whoever that was would have been gone if police had came.
This story takes place about a year ago. I was traveling all by myself on a road trip to visit family. It was a really long drive, and it would most likely take 2 whole days to get there. During the first day, I booked a hotel for a little bit past the halfway point. I wanted to get a little bit more driving done in the first day if possible. Things started out really well, and I only stopped a couple of times for gas, food, and to use the bathroom. I would stop at places that were the quickest, usually rest stops and gas stations just off the highway. I had been up since early in the morning, and if I had enough caffeine, it would usually keep me going. In the afternoon and early evening, though, I hit a rough patch of traffic. I think there was some road construction, and that was just a popular time to be on the road as well. Things got backed up and significantly slowed down for a few hours. I found myself now a bit behind the schedule I was hoping to be on. The hotel was already booked though, so I had to make it. Finally, at probably like 7 p.m., things started to clear up and the roads were much quieter. I was still almost 5 hours away from the hotel though. I stopped for gas, but then went right back on the road to try to save some time. At about 10 p.m., I was still on the road driving. I had an hour and a half to go, and I had no idea where I was. By now, the roads were very quiet, and I was one of the only cars driving. The area that I was in seemed like it was almost in the middle of nowhere. I was getting really tired as well, and had to use the restroom. I decided that I should stop and try to get an energy drink or something. My car was good on fuel, so I wouldn't need to get gas. I started looking for anything off the side of the road that I could go to. There didn't really seem to be anything though. Finally, I saw a sign for a rest stop just up ahead. I pulled off the road and was happy to hopefully get some energy to finish off the drive. As I approached though, the rest stop was a little underwhelming. It was very small, just a little building. There were some parking spaces along the road that went past it and then back onto the freeway. The place was very dimly lit as well, and nobody else was there besides me. I parked my car and then got out and stretched my legs. I'd been driving for quite a long time without a break. Then I walked inside the small building that the rest stop had. Surrounding it was a little grassy area with a picnic table and what looked like a woods behind it. I had been to a similar rest stop before earlier in the day. Once I was inside, I used the restroom and then left. There was nothing inside the building besides a men's and women's restroom and a small lobby area with just some brochures. There was no vending machine, which is what I was hoping for to get an energy drink or something. At some rest stops, they have the vending machines outside on the side of the building instead of inside of it. I decided to walk around and see if they had one. I went around one side, and it was amazing how much darker and quieter it was over there. I heard some crickets chirping in the distance. The ground went slightly downhill as I walked around the building, but there were no vending machines. I got completely behind the building and was walking around to the other side. That's when I got a kind of eerie feeling for some reason. I stopped and looked around at the woods in the night. Then I heard a noise. It sounded like something was moving just inside of the woods, which was about 50 feet away probably. I thought maybe some kind of animal was there, and I sort of saw a tree branch moving a little. I stopped to see what it was, because I was curious, but part of me was wanting to just turn and run back to my car and get out of there. Still, I stood there looking to see what it was. As my eyes adjusted more to the darkness, I started to notice something. There appeared to be a man crouched sort of behind one of the trees. The guy was looking at me. I couldn't really tell any details about him at all, but he appeared to have a beard. After looking at him for a few seconds, he suddenly stood up. There were no other cars at the rest stop, so I didn't know what he was doing there. After standing, the man took a few steps towards me. I had a really bad feeling, and then the guy suddenly started sprinting in my direction. I took off running for my car as fast as I could. I ran around the building and into the parking area. When I was running, I could hear the man gaining on me from behind. I made it to my car and threw myself inside before slamming and locking the door. As I was scrambling to start my engine and drive away, the man reached my car. He started pounding on the window, and I backed out and drove off after he had smacked my window several times. I got back onto the highway and was really happy to be away from him. I decided to call the police and let them know about what had happened. I didn't want somebody else to stop there and have to encounter him. As for me, I was able to stop a little ways down the road and get an energy drink. I was in the middle of nowhere, but I made it to my hotel just after midnight.
I worked at a laundromat. That's already scary enough in itself. We do laundry service here, and you don't want to know the stuff I've seen. The stuff customers have the audacity to bring in here when the only solution would be to burn what they bring in. More often than you'd think, we have to tell people to come back to pick up their dirty laundry because we just can't wash it, or we won't. They always come and end up washing the stuff in our washers anyway, but hey, if I don't have to touch the stuff, whatever. Now, the story I'm about to tell you is one that still confuses me to this day. It was Halloween 2007. We were supposed to close early, but my boss ended up telling me to stay late because he thought being the only laundromat open on Halloween night sounded like a good business opportunity. I don't think he would have thought that if he was the one that had to stay there, though. So instead of closing at 6 p.m., we were going to close at 11 p.m. I was promised double overtime, so I was all for it. My boss left around 7, gave me the keys, and told me to lock up before I left. I really thought it would be a super slow night, but it wasn't. A lot of older folks came in to do their laundry. They said they were grateful for the late hours on Halloween since it meant that there would be fewer kids in the store than usual. By 10 p.m., everyone was gone, and I didn't expect anyone else to come in that night. About 20 minutes before closing, a man came in. He was wearing torn-up, dirty clothes and reeked of alcohol and, I think, weed. I tried not to judge, though, and told him that he wouldn't have time to dry his stuff before we closed, but he was still welcome to use the washer if he didn't mind taking his wet clothes with him. I would have stayed longer for him to dry his clothes, but I promised my husband that I'd be home early enough to help put the kids to bed, and 11 was already pushing it. I didn't really know what to think when he pulled out blood-soaked clothing from the black trash bag he was carrying. And when I say blood-soaked, I don't mean dried blood. I mean, when this guy pulled the clothes out of the bag, they were sopping wet and dripping with blood. I was staring at him wide-eyed. He must have noticed because he turned to me and asked if we had any bleach and that he was a butcher and those were his work clothes. He bought some bleach and all I could say back to him was, His clothes smacked against the sides of the washer as he loaded them in, and I watched the water and soap turn dark red as the machine swirled the clothes around. When the buzzer finally went off, signaling the cycle was over, I was relieved. He'd chosen the quick cycle, so it was only around 10 past when he was done, and I was excited to go home. But when he pulled the clothes out, they weren't even close to being clean. He came up to the counter and asked, well, actually begged, to please let him run them again. That meant another 30 minutes of me being there with this really sketchy guy washing gallons of blood out of his clothes, but I felt like I couldn't say no. I didn't buy the butcher's story and asked him again what all that blood was from, and this time, actually got a different story. He said that he wasn't actually a butcher and just used that as an excuse. He said it was actually fake blood that he bought from the Halloween store for a prank that he was playing on his buddies that night. He slipped and got it all over himself instead. I didn't buy that either, but I didn't want him to know that, so I agreed to let him run them through again. He restarted the washer after adding more bleach, and the water ran clear this time. He asked if I wanted to hear a scary story, and God knows I didn't, but again, thought saying no to this man wasn't an option, so I just said sure. And here's what he said. A man was walking in an alleyway at night when he got this urge, an urge he'd been feeling on and off for years. He always held back and learned to ignore it, but this time, he couldn't. He wouldn't. He had to give in. He had to satisfy this craving he'd been having. It felt like if he didn't, he would die. His soul would die. What was this urge? It was the urge to kill. The man had experimented with death since childhood. He would dissect dead animals he found and became weirdly fascinated by serial killers and the way they thought. He related to them. He even wanted to be like them sometimes. Well, the pre-prison version of them at least. Killing animals was fine, but it was never enough. When he got into his later adult years and got a job, moving up a level was all he ever thought about. He found himself in that alleyway, fully prepared to go up to that level. He just didn't know exactly how. He didn't have a plan or know where to go, who to look for. He just knew that was the night. He walked through downtown and saw a woman standing on the corner. She was obviously a call girl, and he asked her if he could buy her services and if they could go step into an alley since he had nowhere else to take her. She agreed, and they walked together into the darkness. As he walked behind her, he saw an old rusty metal pipe laying on the ground beside a dumpster. He picked it up and hit her in the back of the head with it. He hit her so hard she fell to the ground completely unconscious. Her head began oozing blood, and he'd never seen so much blood come out of the human body before, and he was entranced by it. He sat down next to her and put his hands in the blood, rubbing it all over his face and clothes. He picked her up and laid her head into his lap and watched the blood drain over his body. The feeling he got was like no other. It was like something he couldn't even describe. I told him to stop telling me the story since it was grossing me out and really scaring me, and thankfully he did. Before I knew it, the buzzer to the machine went off again and he was loading his pink wet clothes into his bag and heading out the door. I was a little scared to leave after him, but I just wanted to get home. I grabbed my things, locked up, and rushed quickly to my car in the night. The next day when I went to open the laundromat in the morning, there were officers waiting for me, and I instantly knew why. There could be no other explanation. And they asked me if a man came in with bloody clothes the night before, and I told them everything. I asked how they knew he came in, and they said that they were able to follow him on security cameras and street cams and saw him come into the laundromat from the camera across the street. It turns out the story he told me was true, and it was, of course, about him. Thankfully, the woman he had obviously tried to murder narrowly survived after someone found her lying there not long after she was hit. She lost a lot of blood from her skull area and was on life support, but was expected to recover in time. They still haven't found the guy, terrifyingly enough, and thank God I haven't seen him since. There have been no other instances similar to that, so I don't know if he's attempted anything again. I keep a lookout in the news and pray he never tries to hurt anyone again, even though with what he said, I know he probably will. I'm scared for anyone who has to face that evil man. I don't know what I would do if I saw him again, but I do know one thing. I'll never, ever work late on Halloween night at a laundromat, ever again. I want to start off by saying I'm not one of those people that thinks kids shouldn't have candy on Halloween. Growing up, I even hated the people who would hand out apples and pretzels. It was always such a bummer. But one year, I was working so much that I forgot to get candy until literally the day of, and when I went to the store to get some, there wasn't any left. The only thing left was some stupid pretzels in the ghost spider and web shapes. I mentally screamed at myself, but I had no other choice. To get those and hand them out tonight when kids would eventually be coming by. Throughout the whole night, every time I handed out the pretzels, I apologized to the kids and told them next year I'd have full-size candy bars. No one seemed to be upset by the pretzels, and some kids even told me that they were happy to get pretzels, but I think they were just saying that to be nice. It was all fine and dandy until around 10 p.m. I opened the door to a group of teenage boys who were not at all pleased with what I had to give them. I was surprised that they actually had the audacity to complain and call me a fat loser for giving them pretzels instead of candy. One of them even demanded I give them money for ruining their Halloween and not having the good stuff. After around the 5th insult, I just shut my door. I heard one of them kick it as they were leaving, and one of them shouted, "You'll regret this." They were just stupid kids, though. I didn't think they'd actually do anything to me just because one of the many houses they went to gave them pretzels. I turned my porch lights off to signal that I was done handing out stuff for the night and went and sat on the sofa to watch scary movies and eat some popcorn as the night rolled on. A couple of hours later, as I was watching the original Halloween movie, I heard a crashing sound coming from the front door. I went to see what it was, and I found a rock with a note tied to it that said, "Do you regret it now?" Believe it or not, I actually chuckled a little because it was so cheesy and set the rock and note down on the kitchen counter as I went to get a tarp to cover the window so no rain could get in, as we were expecting a small storm the next day. Obviously, I was livid. When I came back into the room with the tarp, I heard another crashing sound coming from the bedroom on the other side of the house. Again, there was a rock with another note that said, "You fat pig, we'll kill you." This time, I felt my stomach sink, and there was no chuckle. This isn't fun anymore. I picked up my phone and called the police, who told me that they were really busy that night and it might be a little while until someone could come out there. She told me to call back if the situation escalated, but if no one was actually harming me, they couldn't make what was happening to me a priority over anyone else who was calling them that night. They were very low-staffed. So, I put tarps on both the windows and sat back down to just try and enjoy the rest of the movie, I guess. But I just couldn't. The whole time I was thinking about what the note said and the fact that I was just a sitting duck with my windows broken in like that. I heard my car alarm go off next, but I wasn't about to open the door to go outside and see what was going on. Instead, I headed upstairs and looked out my bedroom window. The windshield had been completely smashed in and the rest of the car didn't look much better. All I could think about was how these kids must be certifiably insane to do this over some stupid pretzels. All at once, bricks and stones came crashing through every window in my house. One narrowly missed my head as it passed through the window that I was looking out of. Glass was flying in every direction, and I was screaming as the sound of every window breaking was almost too much to bear. I had started to become scared for my life, so I grabbed the phone and called the police again to tell them that they needed to get there immediately. I saw the neighbors come outside to see what the noise was, and I yelled for them to call the police and get back inside. I rushed downstairs to get out of the house and take refuge with one of the neighbors, but that was never going to happen. At the bottom of the stairs was the same group of kids from earlier, the same kids who had been terrorizing me that night. Only this time, they were holding bats and rope. I rushed back into my bedroom and locked the door behind me, but that didn't stop them. They broke through the door like it was nothing and rushed towards me, screaming like they were going into battle or something. They beat me while screaming insults and laughing. I remember laying there and becoming numb to every blow that came across my body. And the laughing is what disturbed me the most. They were enjoying what they were doing, and eventually, all I saw was black. The police arrived sometime later to find me curled up in the fetal position on my bedroom floor, bruised and bloodied. They called an ambulance that took me to the hospital, and I ended the night with 8 broken ribs, a broken collarbone, torn ligaments, multiple lacerations to my body, a fractured eye socket, and fractured skull. They told me with the beating I got, I was lucky to have survived with no internal injuries or major brain damage. I spent a couple of months in the hospital and had to move in with my mother during my recovery. Thankfully, those idiots were stupid enough to brag about what they did in school. They must have bragged to the wrong person because one of the people they told ended up going to the police with the information. All in all, 8 boys between the age ranges of 14 to 17 were arrested and charged with home invasion and attempted murder, as well as assault with a deadly weapon. They were all tried as adults and their sentences ranged from 12 to 25 years. Some made deals to talk about what had happened to get lighter sentences, and I was relieved that they got the time they did. I had little hope when they were originally arrested since they were all minors. I have fully recovered, and the only lasting injury I have has been PTSD from that night. All in all, I'm just glad I'm alive today, able to tell the story. Safe to say, I don't hand out pretzels anymore. I don't hand out anything. I refuse to answer my door on Halloween night, and I don't want to risk angering the wrong kids and possibly repeat the scariest night of my entire life.
Hey everyone, this is a story that I remember recently while talking to my friends about stuff we used to do in high school. For clarification, I'm a female, and the story happened around 2015 to 2016. I also went to school in a small southern town where news spreads very fast. When the story happened, my friends and I were juniors in high school. We were kind of the nerdy outcasts in my school, and we tended to plan get-togethers all around the holidays. Usually we would just play video games, order pizza, all that good stuff. We were planning our usual Halloween get-together for the year when gossiping was spreading around about a huge Halloween party that was taking place just outside of our town. My friends and I weren't interested, but a lot of girls at our school were. Guys from other high schools were inviting them and a lot of other teenage girls to the party. Me and a couple of my friends were invited too, but like I said, we just weren't interested. The party was said to have tons of weed and alcohol at it, and my friends and I were pretty clean and sober. Though because of how small, boring, and religious our town was, a lot of teens were willing to get involved in some trouble, especially if it involves drugs and alcohol. After Halloween, we had police at our school asking questions to specific students, and even interrupting our classes to talk to people. Well, as it turns out, it wasn't a harmless Halloween party hosted by some teenage boys. It was actually a Halloween party hosted by creepy old men who had paid teenage boys to lure teenage girls to their house. They were found out because some girls tried to leave the party and were then stopped by one of the men. Our girl had brought her boyfriend, and he stepped in to try and help her. One of the men got so furious by this that he ended up beating the shit out of the boyfriend to the point of unconsciousness. A neighbor close by where the party was called the police, and the men were then arrested swiftly. When the police searched the house, there were drugs, guns, and voicemails talking about kidnapping and selling some of the girls at the party. They even found text messages where they were taking pictures of the girls at the party for the approval of whoever they were talking to. The arrests and evidence spread like wildfire in our town. All of the people, especially parents, were terrified. I remember that some of the kids at our school had even moved away after that incident. I graduated college pretty recently, and the story came up again at another Halloween get-together with my friends. It's still terrifying to think what might have happened if the police weren't called. What horrible things would have happened to our classmates if nobody witnessed anything. We all agree that it was sheer luck that everybody made it out okay, and that the boyfriend who stepped in recovered at the hospital. Just remember to be careful out there. You really never know what can happen.
This took place when I was about 19 years old, and this is something that nobody should ever have to go through. To cut to the chase, it was Halloween night of 2010, and my friends and I had been invited to a Halloween party from a few classmates that was open to pretty much anyone. Kind of like what you'd expect at a block party. I was not the most popular girl in school, so I really didn't know anyone except for the friend I was going with. There were lights, food, music, and they even had a pool in the back, which was off limits for whatever reason. My friend was busy getting wasted with a few guys, and I was that awkward third wheel girl who didn't know what to do. Eventually, I grabbed a couple of beers and went outside to go smoke by some trees, since smoking obviously wasn't allowed inside. So I'm smoking a cigarette and practically chugging my beers by a tree, enjoying that cool October breeze when I look to my left and see some guy walking towards me. I give him a quick wave to say hello, and he nervously says hi. At first, I thought he was from the party. But the more I noticed him, the more I began to realize that he didn't look like he belonged here. Most of us were high school aged. This guy looked like he was in his mid-40s or 50s. His eyes were red and his face was pale, and he wore a dirty white undershirt with cargo pants. He walked right up to me and said, "Got any more smokes? I could use one." I reply with, "Sure thing." I give him my lighter and he takes a few puffs and immediately throws it onto the ground and stomps on it. It was a bit unexpected, but I didn't feel threatened. I tell him it was nice meeting him and that I was going back inside to meet my friend. All of a sudden, he tells me to wait and that he wanted to show me something he found deeper into the trees. Now, seeing as I was extremely tipsy, I accepted, and he grabs my hand and we descend into the woods. We walk for about 3 minutes and I could barely hear the music at this point. We then come to a stop. He sighs and he says that what he wanted to show me was right here. Before I could ask what it was, he grabs my arm and covers my mouth tight. I'm trying to fight to get out of his grasp, but this guy was much more bigger and stronger than I was, and being drunk didn't help. I'm trying to scream, but his hand was on my mouth hard, clearly trying to suffocate me. Eventually, he lets go of my arm for a brief second, and at that point, I saw my chance. I turn around and kick him in the kneecap, causing him to fall to the ground screaming. I'm screaming as well, while running all the way back to the party where I saw a few people looking at me with confused looks. I begin to tell them that I was almost groped, and they take me back inside to inform everybody. The host of the party calls the cops, and our Halloween party turned into that of a crime scene. Needless to say, the man was never found, and nothing ever happened like that after that one Halloween night. For a little bit of context, I'm a female, and this happened on Halloween night of 2018, and I was working at the wildly popular Spirit Halloween store. It wasn't the best job, but I was struggling financially to keep up with my college tuition and rent, so I really needed the money. With us being the top Halloween store, we were obviously open on Halloween night, and that was one of the nights where I didn't want to work but unfortunately had to. It was me and my coworker Cameron. I was in charge of checking the merchandise while Cameron was our cashier and the store was dead. To cut to the chase, I had been putting a few items in their correct places due to the customers not caring and just leaving them wherever they want. As I'm walking around, I hear the door open and see a very freakishly tall man walk in. I say, "Hello, welcome to Spirit." He gives me a nod to, I guess, say thanks, and then walks around the store. At one point, I'm putting some of the masks in their correct places when the man comes walking in the aisle. I give him a polite smile and asks if he needed help with anything. With a very deep and raspy voice, he says, "Yeah, you can help me by giving me your number." I nervously laugh, trying not to be rude, and tell him that I couldn't do that and that I have a boyfriend. "Oh, well, I mean, he doesn't have to know. I can give you a ride home when you get off work." I tell him no thank you and that I have a ride, but would be more than happy to help him with anything else. He gave me a firm no and then left out the door, clearly upset that it didn't go his way. When I told Cameron about the guy, he was just as creeped out as I was. Cameron, being the good friend he was, offered to take me home since he actually had a car. I gladly accepted and thanked him. Fast forward till around closing time, we clean everything up and I clock out and close the store. While walking to his car, I saw the man in an old Honda Civic staring right at me with a look I can't even seem to forget about. It was the kind of look you'd give when you're angry about something, as if he'd be back for me. I ended up telling my boss the whole ordeal, and he asked Cameron if he could drive me home for the remainder of my time working there since we only had a week left. Seeing as Spirit was a seasonal store, we had only worked for about 2 months. I am forever grateful that Cameron had offered me a ride that day, because I had no idea of that man's intentions.
I'm a 32-year-old female living in Colorado, and Halloween is by far my favorite time of the year. But one Halloween stands out in my mind that I'll never forget, and it's not for the right reasons. It was 2007 and I was about 17 years old. Once it got dark, I met up with a few of my friends, Brittany, Rick, Curtis, and Micah. We were walking around a trailer park, smoking weed, and taking shots, and just having a good time. We must have been walking for about 20 minutes when we came up on this group of guys that were smoking a meth pipe just out in the open. We just walked straight past them when one of them yelled, "Hey," as loud as possible. We all stopped and turned around, and Curtis said, "Yeah?" One of the guys asked in a demanding voice, "Want to give me a hit of what you got there?" Curtis held up the roach. We just finished smoking, and he said, "Sorry, man. We just finished it off." They didn't reply. They just turned away from us. Suddenly, one of them turned around and asked for $5. Again, Curtis responded, "Sorry, man, I'm broke." The guy gave a really weird smile, baring his crooked yellow teeth, but his eyes were dead and cold. It was very unsettling and clearly a forced smile. He then said, "Oh, all right. You guys have a good night." We turned back and started walking away. Something was off about that group of people. But then again, they were on hard drugs. We walked for about a minute until I heard a bunch of people running up behind us. It was Halloween at that time, so there was a lot of people everywhere. But it was that group of people again, and they were coming up fast. We bolted down the road, and everyone ran off in different directions. I jumped a few fences and hid inside a random person's shed. My heart was beating so hard I thought it was about to explode. I waited about 20 minutes, slowly opened the shed, and peered out. I didn't see anyone, so I started to look for my friends. Found Brittany and Rick. We looked around for Curtis and Micah. Curtis' phone was dead and Micah wasn't answering. We finally found Curtis. One of those psychos stabbed him in the leg and took his wallet, and his jeans were soaked in blood. We called 911 right away. Then we found Micah laying on the sidewalk. She could barely get up, and she told us that two of the guys jumped her and beat her, as well as stealing her money from her pocket. For reference, Micah is about 115 pounds and 5'1". It disgusts me to think that full-grown men were so high that they thought it was okay to beat up an innocent small girl like that. It definitely ruined one of my favorite holidays, and I still think about it these years later. If a random group of people ever call out to you, just keep walking. Always carry a taser, pepper spray, just any weapon. You never know what kind of weirdos are lurking out there in the dark. I'm a girl, and this happened when I was about 9 years old. At the time, I loved to trick-or-treat in my neighborhood. This was short-lived because, by then, my neighborhood wasn't exactly safe anymore. That year, which was 1992, I attended a church Halloween party. There were many kids that I recognized from school and from nearby areas. I dressed up in a little devil costume that year, complete with paste-on horns and, the usual. Yeah, a little bold for a church party, but several other kids were dressed as devils, and I saw many girls dressed as witches. The party host, who I'll call Father Francis, stood greeting everyone. I remember he was dressed like a version of Captain Hook. Every kid attending got goodie bags at the door from Father Francis. For some reason, every kid who was dressed up as a witch or a devil got a baggie of homemade cookies. They looked like sugar cookies, with powdered sugar dusting the tops. The party was great fun, but I was eager to get home and try a cookie. Father Francis had told us not to eat the cookies there because he said it's our little secret. I saw nothing sinister at the time, but looking back, something seemed weird and wrong. When I got home, I decided to try one the next day. I remember finally trying a cookie. I almost immediately spat it out in the garbage. It tasted really bad, and the powdered sugar was bitter tasting. My mom noticed my reaction and asked to try one. Her reaction was identical to mine. She demanded to know where I've gotten these from. I told her Father Francis had given me a bag of them. Grabbing the bag, she inspected the cookies. She smelled the bag, making a suspicious face. And then she tasted the powdered sugar. Her eyes widened, and she practically hurled the bag of cookies into the trash. "Don't eat those, honey, all right? Those are bad. Very bad cookies." As this was a Saturday, we had no way of alerting fellow classmates or friends. Monday, I learned the worst had happened. 16 children, all who had been given a bag of cookies, had been hospitalized for contamination. We learned the powdered sugar was in fact ant chalk. Of the 16 children that got sick, 2 died because they'd eaten a whole bag of cookies. Thankfully, I never got sick because I only bitten one, but never swallowed it. Father Francis ended up going to prison for 20 years for his involvement. He claimed in his defense, he was doing God's work by ridding the world of evil. He turned out to be an evil man who felt no pity for the children who got sick, or the 2 who had sadly died. I heard as they hauled him off to prison, he kept screaming, "I did God's work. I'm a tool of God. I did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong." From then on, I never attended another church party of any kind, and my trust for those figures was pretty much destroyed. I also have almost never accepted baked goods from others again. I kept thinking, what if I had been one of those who had eaten a full bag? Chances are I've been hospitalized too, or much worse. The moral of the story is, be careful of anything you accept from others, even if they're a person of cloth.
So right when I was fresh out of college, I managed to land myself a job with an engineering firm over in Pennsylvania. It kind of sucked having to move away from Rochester, New York, where all my friends and family were, but the salary this firm was offering was so sweet that I just couldn't turn it down. So I went online and got looking for apartments just outside of Philly, eventually finding an advert for a guy who was looking for a roommate for a super swanky apartment. I mean, this place was really nice, and I could get why the guy would be looking for a roommate to split the rent with, especially since he seemed to be a younger dude who was probably in a similar position as I was. However, I didn't have the time to drive down to actually look at the place or meet the guy in person, so I pretty much did all the arrangements by phone, which maybe, now that I look back on it, was my first big mistake. So I moved in with this guy, Daryl, who was super chill and pretty much spent all day playing 2K since he worked nights. I figured that he must have had a pretty high-paying job, and since he had this huge flat-screen TV, lots of expensive clothes, a nice car, the works, really. We didn't talk all that much, since we were on such different schedules, but eventually, when I asked him exactly what it is that he did for a living, he gave some super vague answer about having some kind of accountancy job. And no matter how much I pressed him for details, he always gave some wishy-washy answer until he got tired of the questions and changed the subject. Like a lot of you reading this, I started to suspect that Daryl wasn't quite telling the truth about what he did for a living. Like not once did I see him wearing anything like a shirt and tie. All his clothes were super upmarket, sure, but they were all super casual. He also had a lot of visitors in the evenings before we left for work. At first, I figured they were just friends of his, but there were a handful he didn't seem all that close with, and every time they stopped by to see him, at some point they just scuffle off into Daryl's bedroom for a while, talking in hushed tones before the visitor eventually left. I knew something was going on, but as embarrassing as it is, back then I was pretty naive. Besides that, I really didn't think it was any of my business. The last thing I wanted to do was upset my new roommate and screw away such a sweet living arrangement. So, this one Saturday, I'm in the local 7-Eleven just like a block away from the apartment when this dude comes up to me as I'm looking at coffee and asks me if I'm the guy who lives with Daryl. Obviously, I'm all like, yeah, good to see you, dude. I didn't recognize the guy, but I figured that he'd visited the apartment one time and I just couldn't quite remember his face. He's being all friendly and whatnot, making small talk about this and that before he asked if I know whether or not Daryl was at home right then. I told him I didn't know, but that since it was like mid-afternoon that he probably was since he worked nights, whatever that entailed. And the guy's all like, okay, cool, I might stop by and say hi. And all this stuff, then makes some excuses and leaves the store. I pick up a few things and head back to the apartment, half expecting to see the guy from the 7-Eleven when I walk through the door. Only he's not there, and when I tell Daryl about how I saw one of his buddies in the store, he has no idea who I'm talking about. Even when I describe the guy in quite vivid detail, he has absolutely zero clue who I'm referring to. He starts reeling off names, asking if it was Deshaun or Robbie or Angelo, and it's then that I sort of realize that the guy hadn't given me a name at all, which is weird, right? I mean, I thought it was. You think the dude would have been like, tell him such and such said hi, or at least something like that. I didn't really think anything of it at the time, but Daryl seemed just a little too freaked out by the encounter for my liking, and in the moments after I told him, he marches off into his bedroom and stays there for the rest of the evening, talking to someone, I'm guessing on the phone, in those same hushed tones that I was used to hearing. A few days after this, I'm walking back up towards the 7-Eleven to grab some milk for coffee when I see the same dude that hadn't given his name parked up at the side of the road. He calls out to me, greeting me and making chit-chat in that same warm way he had before again asking if Daryl was home. This time I straight up lie to him, telling him that, yeah, Daryl was home, only this time he was with a bunch of his friends playing 2K. He wasn't. He was actually out visiting family across the city, but there was something about this guy that I really didn't like. I quickly make an excuse telling him I had to go, and it was only then that this guy's demeanor started to change. He wasn't all smiles and laughs anymore. He just eyeballed me as I walked away, and he was still there when I walked back, just watching me as I walked towards our apartment. I should have seen it coming, and I feel like such an idiot for not knowing what I was headed for. But I guess in hindsight, it's always 2020. Because a couple of nights later, I was just about to catch some sleep when Daryl finally comes home from work. He seems a little shaken and asks me if anyone had called by the apartment that evening. I tell him no, it's been pretty quiet, but the answer doesn't satisfy him. He asks me if I'd seen anyone at all, anyone hanging around the area that I didn't recognize. I'd already told him about the second encounter that I'd had with the 7-Eleven guy, and this time it had creeped him out even more. He asked if I'd seen that same guy at any point that evening, and I told him no, that I hadn't seen him since that weekday evening. I turned the whole thing around and asked him why he was so nervous about this, if anything had happened at work that evening, but he was his usual cagey self. He just retreated to his bedroom where he apparently went straight to sleep, which is exactly what I did too. Next thing I know, I'm waking up to this loud banging on the front door to our apartment. I had pretty much knew exactly what the deal was. Daryl had gone out to make a call, as he sometimes did at this time of night, and had left his keys in the apartment. This had happened a handful of times before, and I was honestly getting really sick of being woken up by it. I'd suggested he actually put his car keys and apartment keys on the same key ring, but nope, apparently that meant if he lost one set, he lost both, which maybe was quite a smart idea in the long run, but that's beside the point. So I'm all bleary-eyed, shuffling toward the front door in my underwear and a t-shirt when he starts banging again. I'm like, all right, I'm coming. Stop with the banging, Jesus. Before I undo the deadbolts and open the door, I start saying something like, you really should just attach those freaking keys, when I see it's not Daryl at all. In fact, I have no idea who the guy at the door is, because he's wearing a freaking ski mask, and I have absolutely not the time or will to ask him, nor the other two idiots that he's with, because as soon as I open the door, he points a gun in my face, and then frog marches me back inside the apartment before locking the door behind them. The ski mask guy makes me kneel on the floor in the TV room and whispers to me that if I shout or anything, he's going to blow my brains out. I was absolutely terrified. I mean, more scared than I've ever been in my entire life. I had these uncontrollable shakes, like I had trouble just holding my head up. It was more comfortable for me to just rest my chin against my chest and pray that it'd all be over soon. This had a dual purpose too, because the last thing I saw before I did so and shut my eyes tight was one of the guys placing an empty plastic bottle of the muzzle on his pistol. Naive over something I was, yes, but I knew enough to know that this was some kind of ad hoc way to silence a shot. I didn't want to see what happened next, and I'm glad I didn't, because they burst into Daryl's room, and I heard the pop of that pistol as they shot him. I thought he was dead for a few minutes, like I was convinced that they just straight up executed him right there in his bed. That was until they dragged him out of the bedroom, bleeding and cursing, and threw him down on the TV room floor a few meters away from me. The one guy kept his gun to the back of my head while they pretty much tortured Daryl right there in the TV room. One guy stamped on the bullet wound that he had, leaning on it with his sneaker, while the other forced his face into a couch cushion to muffle the screams. I mean, it was all obviously horrible what they were doing, and that was disturbing enough. But what really got me was how they seemed to enjoy the whole thing, how they seemed to take an immense amount of personal pleasure in causing us both as much pain and distress as was physically possible. It was like hearing Darrow's cries of pain was the funniest joke they'd ever heard, how the sight of his blood was the most fascinating, satisfying thing they'd ever seen. And it was then that it all came out. Like I said, you might have guessed what the deal was by now, but I pretty much had no idea back then. I was just so young and dumb. Daryl was a drug dealer and this was a robbery. So they beat the life out of him until he finally spoke up and told them where he kept his money in his stash. But I mean, for a while there, I thought they might have gotten the wrong place. Daryl flat out denied knowing what they were talking about and insisted that they got in the wrong place and how there was nothing to find there. But in the end, he broke and told them. They then took to clearing him out, and from what he told me, after he'd been discharged from the hospital for a fairly superficial gunshot wound to the shoulder, they'd taken him for about $20,000 plus. I had to cover Daryl's rent for a few months until he was well enough to get himself a real job. Turns out he was an actual college graduate with a business degree and was dealing in college to make a little money. When he graduated, the money came too easy that he just didn't bother to get a legit job. He wasn't a gangster. He just didn't have that kind of personality, which I suppose is what made him the perfect prey for the actual criminals that broke in that night. We got over what happened, but obviously Daryl still has this big old scar on his shoulder, a reminder of one of the worst nights of our lives, one that'll always be with us no matter where we go, or what we do, or who we become. My family is a small farm here in Kirkwood, upstate New York. We grow a few veggies, keep a few chickens, nothing too spectacular, but it's home and we love it. But a little while ago, back in early 2019, we got woken up by something in the middle of the night that scared the absolute life out of us. We have this big front yard with flower beds and a big lawn, and that's where we keep the chickens and the dog too. So me, my mom, and my dad were all sleeping one night when we're woken up by this huge crash in the front yard. I can hear our dog barking really, really loud and violently before there's like this yelping sound from it and he goes quiet. I walk out into the hallway and see my dad storming out of my parents' bedroom, rushing down the stairs to get his shotgun. Me and my mom were about to follow him outside to get a look at whatever was going on, but he yells at us to call the cops, stay inside, and not follow him under any circumstances. My dad grabs the phone and I rush back into my bedroom to watch from the window. As soon as I look out, I see this car that's smashed through the fence of our yard and torn up a section of our lawn. It's obviously really dark out, and the car's headlights are only lighting up a section of our yard, so I can't really see much outside of the beams. But I do see something that absolutely breaks my heart. It's our dog, lying on the front lawn, not moving at all. He looked really hurt. Something had really messed him up. But given that he was barking after the actual smash of the car, it couldn't have been the impact that hurt him so bad. Something else entirely. What I saw next was only because my dad had this little light attached to the end of his shotgun. He starts shining it around the front yard as I hear my mom calling 911 in the hallway, telling them that something horrible had happened at our address and for them to come as quickly as they could. Then my dad shines the shotgun light over towards the chicken coop, and I saw something that I continue to see in my nightmares for a long time to come. It was a man, completely naked from head to toe, kneeling among torn-out feathers and broken bodies, and he was sinking his teeth into the flesh of a still-living chicken that he held tight in his grip. Every time he bit into the chicken, it would flap and shake, making the most awful screeching noises as he tore more raw flesh from its body. My dad racked a shell into the chamber and started screaming at the guy to get out of the chicken coop. But the guy barely listens at first, just carries on ripping this big brown chicken apart with his bare hands and teeth. And by the time he does actually start listening to my dad, God, it was horrible. He looked right into the light of the shotgun so that his face was perfectly lit up, and he smiled. There was blood and feathers all over his face and chin. He looked monstrous, totally insane, eyes bulging out of their sockets. I think even to this day it's probably the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. I started banging on the window and begging my dad to come back inside. I was so scared the guy was going to attack him or something, and if he did, that Dad would shoot him. And I know it's maybe a little lame of me, but I just didn't want to see any of that. I was already distraught from seeing our dog just lying there all lifeless on the lawn, and I know I wouldn't be able to handle it if anything had happened to my dad. Luckily, the guy didn't bother doing anything to my dad at first. I think he was just so blinded by the light of the shotgun that he just sort of stared into the flashlight, hypnotized by it for a few seconds. But he soon rose up off of his knees, that bloody, twitching chicken still in his grip, and started to make a move towards my dad. As soon as he did, the sound of Dad's shotgun rang out as he fired a shot above the guy's head. But the guy hardly flinched. That's when I realized he must have been on some kind of drug or something, maybe meth or PCP or whatever. He didn't seem scared at all by the fact that he'd almost had his head blown off, but it was definitely enough to put him off from straight up attacking my dad. He just carried on smiling though, kneeling back down among the chickens as he carried on ripping them apart. It felt like an hour before I finally saw the red and blue flashing lights of the cop cars coming down the road. But from what I learned later, it was only a couple of minutes before they actually arrived, since they happened to have a unit in the area already down highway patrol. When they arrested the guy, he got really crazy, and they had to actually use their tasers, which had little effect at first, and pepper spray on the guy just to get him on the ground. We later found out that the guy, named John Many, was actually from Florida, that there had been a manhunt for him, and he'd somehow gotten all the way up to New York State using stolen cars and hiding himself away in trucks. We weren't the only place he'd attacked either, since he actually killed another dog on a different farm, maybe less than 2 miles away from us. That was definitely the most terrifying thing I'd ever woken up to in the middle of the night, by a long shot too. Thankfully, our dog survived.
I live in a town of about 11,000 in rural Wisconsin, not by preference, but for a job. We are moving when I get a better one. I was on my way to my employer's house. He runs the company out of his basement until we get new office space. I was being tailgated bad by a ratty blue car and a white bald guy. I drive a Kia Soul, which has a flat back end, so if I can't see your headlights, you are a mere few inches off my butt, and you will get me tapping my brakes. This guy did. He honked at me. Whatever. I flipped him off and slowed down to 5 miles under the speed limit. There wasn't anyone behind him, so I wasn't ruining anyone else's day. He had chances to pass me on the county road, but didn't. After a few minutes with no other cars around and him still kissing my bumper at 50 miles per hour, I grabbed my cell phone and pretended to turn around quickly and take a picture of him. Then I pretended to call 911. I was in the country with no other cars around, and this guy was getting creepy. I came to my turn but decided to see if this guy would follow me. I turned left and he followed. Then I came to a roundabout and thought I would lose him. I traveled the entire thing around twice. He followed me. At this point I knew he was messing with me, trying to scare me. Well, I decided to let myself be late for my meeting. I began to drive to the police station. He followed me the whole way there. I pulled up and parked, ready to run inside. I thought he would leave. Nope. He parked right next to me and just stared at me. And he pulled up on my side of the car, close enough that I would have had a hard time opening the door all the way. He was in his 40s, I'm guessing, wearing sunglasses and a creepy smile. He was wearing fairly neat clothes, nothing scary there. The interior of the car was pristine. I was looking for a gun. I should mention here that I'm training to be a behavior analyst, and while I work with kids right now, my hobby is criminal behavior and profiling. I was seriously trying to read this guy. A few seconds went by and I grabbed my phone again, this time intent on calling 911 from the police station parking lot. As I dialed, he rolled his passenger window down, said nothing, rolled it back up, and took off. I went inside and told an officer what happened. Sadly, I was too focused on not crashing to get a plate. Apparently, there have been a lot of complaints about tailgaters recently, multiple with a blue car. I filled out a report with the officer, and they gave me a card for victim services and a local women's shelter, just in case he followed me home one night and I didn't feel safe, but I live in a secure building with my fiancée. I went out to my car, and there was a note on the windshield. All it had on it was a smiley face, serious horror movie stuff. I took it back inside. The officer said he'd call me a few times during the night and I should avoid going anywhere alone for a while. He did call twice and said he was patrolling my parking lot during his night shift. This is a small town, and the attitude around here is very communal, so I feel safe in that someone will back me up. If I ever see this guy again, no question, I will call the cops and lead him straight to the police station again. I also told my fiancé that I will post my work schedule, or even when I have to leave for another reason, and that if I don't text him within 10 minutes of my estimated arrival time, he should call the police. My hometown was decimated by flooding from Hurricane Floyd in 1999. Part of the response and recovery efforts involved FEMA setting up RVs as temporary housing for those whose homes were either destroyed or heavily damaged. These RVs were set up in a previously vacant field outside of town. The park was dismantled by 2001 or so. They put up fencing around the perimeter and trenched over the other streets into the area to keep people out. But they forgot one entrance or left it purposely open for emergency vehicles to have access. Some friends of mine had found this entrance, and we frequently used the area as our playground. We would go back there to set off fireworks, turn the streets into a race course, and to have sex with our girlfriends. To set the stage of how this place looked, there were 3 streets running east-west orientation, a street that went around the other streets in an oval fashion. The grass was very overgrown and about 4 feet high. The south and north sides of the area were wooded, and the east side had large dirt berms that were about 20 feet high and had been placed there when the site was graded in 1999. They normally provided a climbing challenge for our SUVs. On this particular day, my girlfriend and I were parked on one of the east-west streets amongst the tall grass to remain hidden. We got undressed to have sex in the back seat of the car. As we began, I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. I turned to look, and there was a man coming over the 20-foot-high dirt berm. He was wearing denim overalls, and in his left hand was a full-size axe. A wave of fear washed over me, and I yelled out, "Oh my God!" My girlfriend popped up to look out the back windshield and let out a scream, asking, "What are we going to do?" Frantically, I started looking for the car keys. There was a pile of clothes on the floorboard, and I couldn't find them. I looked out the back, and he was getting closer. I could see his face now, emotionless with a blank stare. I started grabbing clothes and shaking them, hoping to find the keys. They popped loose and fell to the floor. I grabbed them and immediately jumped into the driver's seat, still completely naked. I started the car, and from the back seat my still naked girlfriend screamed, "Go!" I looked in the rearview mirror as I put the car into drive, and he was now within about 50 feet of the car, the same blank look on his face, but he was staring at the car with the axe still in hand. I didn't even fasten my seatbelt, and was still fully nude as I floored the gas, kicking up rocks everywhere as the tires spun while I sped away from this man holding the axe. We got out of the abandoned FEMA park as quickly as I could drive the car without crashing. My girlfriend was hysterical the whole time until we got back to the main road and were safe. We stopped about a mile up the road on the side of the road to put our clothes back on and de-stress. I don't know where this man came from, as there are no houses within a mile or so of the old FEMA site. He seemingly came out of nowhere. I also did not see any other cars at the site as I had done a lap around the park before we chose our spot to park. I'm not sure what his intentions were, as he never said anything to us, and I know he saw us panicking in the car. Whatever his intentions were, I know they weren't good. The look on his face and the axe in his hand made that abundantly clear. I went back with a few friends a few days later and found no place this guy could have been lurking, and there were no signs anyone had been camping there. To this day, it's one of the scariest events I've ever been through.
Deep in the middle of nowhere, America, in the early hours of March 3rd, 1980, a girl is born. She was the apple of her parents' eyes. From that day on, she could do no wrong. Every birthday was a celebration of her greatness. As she grew into womanhood, she stumbled not once. Her beliefs were always in line with modern thinking, and her opinions were never the wrong ones. If you were to ask them, her folks would put her on par with the angels, as near as to divine and beautiful as humanly possible. This is all BS, of course. The girl was never honest with her elders, not fair to her peers. In school, her grades were average at best. Her awkward fumblings with boys were well known. No one around her age respected or liked her. There were a few she controlled through fear, but in time, even they would break away. The child was nothing like the divine creature her parents viewed her to be. You ask, how do you know all this? Well, you see, I was foolish enough to marry her. I'll refer to her as Alicia from here on. Alicia and I had known one another since middle school. We'd grown up not far apart. Her beauty was a truly breathtaking thing to behold, but it was her only redeeming value. For some strange reason, I was the guy she chose. Over time, I'd come to discover why. Her upbringing had made her an abusive narcissist. This was a major turnoff for most guys on her level. I guess guys on my level were more susceptible to her feminine powers. She knew she had me on the hook from the beginning, but not once did she abuse me the way she did everyone else. I'm not sure I would have broken it off if she had. The relationship had its ups and downs like most do. Every few months we'd get into an argument and break up, only be back together soon after. Anytime society robbed her of something, which was often, I was the one there to prop her up. Maybe at the time I actually believed the world was out to get her. She certainly did. Through every bit of drama, I never considered life without her in it. That's certainly why I followed her to community college, despite being accepted to Stanford. I honestly thought that we'd be moving there after 2 years anyway. Per usual, she barely survived those 2 years. Her grades were terrible, and she had to appeal after flunking out of her first semester. I would do all her homework after that and drill her relentlessly until she passed. She was never really stupid. She'd just been raised to believe everything was hers by right. At the end of that time period, she took a terrible job for her friend's interior design company. When I brought up moving to California, she claimed her job was too important to give up. After a lot of inner conflict, I gave up my dream of Stanford and found a nearby university to attend. 4 years would fly by. I continued on with school while she bounced from one dead-end job to the other. Our first daughter was born along this time. Alicia took a long time to bounce back mentally, but when our second daughter arrived 3 years later, she seemed fine. By then, I was teaching at the high school. A last-minute death in the staff meant I was filling in as a wrestling coach, too. This meant I was spending less time at home. Alicia had long since quit working to raise the girls, a situation I had no problem with. Unfortunately, this gave her time to brood. She began accusing me of having an affair. The saddest aspect of all this was the fact that I still loved her just as much as the day we met. I never once thought of other women. The accusations broke my heart. The claims of cheating had been going on for almost 6 months. Strangely, one day they all stopped. 2 days passed until I had a free day to spend with her and the girls. Everything was great all throughout the day. She even cooked me a wonderful dinner. Afterwards, I was so exhausted I let her know that I was turning in early. I expected this would make her mad, but she looked angry. I should have known things weren't right when she tucked me in. She'd never been the type to do that, not even for the kids. It didn't set off any alarms at the time, though, and soon I was sound asleep. At some point, I was awakened by a sharp pain in my chest. I fought to wake up. I also noticed a pounding sensation. I finally got my eyes open and I saw a form on my chest banging on it repeatedly. I was in that state where I wasn't sure if I was dreaming. Waking up was strangely difficult, but I eventually managed to do it. With my eyes wide open now, I could tell that form was Alicia. I couldn't understand what she was doing, but I knew it hurt. I summed up all the power I could and pushed her off. I ran my hand across my chest and felt a wetness. It took a second to realize that she had been stabbing me. That was when I began to panic. She was already attempting to mount me again, but I fought her off. I knew I had to get away. My legs felt like I was running through the mud, and I didn't know why. I did make it to the door before she jumped on my back and renewed her attack. My survival instincts had kicked in now, and I slung her to the floor, but she sprung back at me. I impulsively struck her twice across the chin, which knocked her out cold. I'm still amazed at what I did. It was something I know I couldn't have done in any other circumstance. This gave me a chance to get a phone and call for help. Our oldest had been awakened by all the noise. She noticed the blood all over me and began to cry. I covered it up by saying I'd spilled ketchup on myself, and I'm not sure she bought it, but she did go back to bed when I asked her to. By now, I could hear Alicia trying to escape from the bedroom. I was in no condition to stop her. I now know she had drugged me. I ran into the hall bathroom and locked myself in. Only now did the blood loss begin to affect me. The dispatcher did her best to keep me awake, bless her heart, but within a few minutes, everything went black. When I regained consciousness the following day, the pain was agonizing. My yelling alerted a nurse who came in and adjusted my IV. Not much happened for a few days. I remember short spurts of consciousness, but not much more. On the fourth day, I awoke on my own, still uncomfortable but feeling better. A nurse arrived and let me know which buttons did what. She left and returned a little while later with breakfast. It was the first time in my life I'd ever had grits. I was so hungry I devoured everything. After lunch is when the cops showed up. I certainly wasn't expecting what I'd heard. It turned out that Alicia tried to rush the responding officers with a knife and they shot her. She had survived and was recuperating just down the hall. And on a positive note, my girls were staying with my mom. I thank her to this day for having the presence of mind not to bring them to me. This all happened in 2008 and I wasn't able to fully explain the entire mess to them for a few years. For the sake of brevity, I was released later that week and Alicia was transferred to the county jail a few days later. She soon took a plea and agreed to 15 years. With all that resolved, I tried to focus on my daughters. I've been fortunate enough to have two supportive parents who've helped me out a lot. Sacrificing my teaching job was something of a disappointment, but administration gave me a regular 9-to-5 arrangement. My oldest is nearing graduation and her sister isn't far behind. I'm amazed at how well they've handled everything, especially growing up into womanhood without a mother. Alicia reached out to them once or twice, but they refused the invitation. I'm never bad to talk to her around them, even after what she did. The choice had always been left up to them. At the end of the day, I think Alicia is the one who suffered the most from all of this. Listen, I'm not making her a victim. She was 100% responsible for her actions, but I know for a fact being away from her daughters was torture. The wounds she'd received never fully healed. The few times I did speak to her, she made mention of her constant pain. Then, just as she was nearing the end of her sentence, she contracted COVID and passed away. It definitely wasn't an ending anyone deserves. Not even her.
This happened to me in 2014, on my way to my great-grandparents' house in Goose Creek, South Carolina. We had left in the late morning around 11 a.m. to try and get there before dinner. Our whole reason behind going was for a cruise vacation my great-grandmother had paid for. It was going to be me, my mother, my father, my aunt, my other aunt, my great-grandfather, and my great-grandmother, along with a few other friends of my GGMs. In the car, it was my mother and I, along with most of our luggage. My father was coming a few days later due to work stuff, so we decided to drive out that day to get there early and catch up on family drama and the usual. My mother had just finished packing the car, and she called me down the stairs to get in the car with my bag of entertainment things. I came rushing down, excited to go on a road trip and to see my family since, at that time, they hadn't caused many of the problems that push us apart today. We started our drive on some scenic back roads before getting towards the inner city and hopping onto the highway. In this story, I'm only 7, so I'm still blissfully naive and unaware of many things in the world. I'm also fuzzy on the details of the persons involved, so the descriptions of the clothing and whatnot may be a bit skewed. I was mainly focused on Minecraft and collecting Beanie Boos at the time, rather than the dangers of reality and strange people. After about 2 hours of us being on the road, I told my mom I needed the bathroom. I had drunk about 2 water bottles and my bladder was complaining. Since we were still near the busy city area, there were plenty of gas stations and corner stores we could stop at. My mom asked if I was hungry as well, to which I excitedly said yes, since this meant that I got junk food, which I didn't get often. So we pulled off at an exit, and came across a Quick Trip not long after. I was bouncing out of my seat with excitement, ready to grab my favorite chips and candy and a sugary drink, which I knew my mom would later regret letting me have. We got out of the car, my mom grabbed her purse, and we headed inside to the bathrooms. My mom waited outside patiently for me to use the restroom, and after a few minutes I came out, and we walked around grabbing snacks and drinks. I grabbed dill pickle Lays, Rolo candies, Cheetos, some sausage sticks, beef jerky, and a Sprite and water from the cooler sections. My mom had a handful of things as well, and we went up to the counter and stood in line. While waiting to check out, I counted the cars in the parking lots and how many of each brand there were since I was super obsessed with cars back then. My mom tugged my arm a bit as the line moved up, so I followed her like the clingy 7-year-old I was. We got up to the counter, greeted the cashier, paid for our things, and left with 2 bags of snacks and drinks. I was giddy with a big grin on my face the whole time, knowing that I would be set for the rest of the trip with my rare treats. As we finished up at the counter, a black man in a red Nike hoodie, black sweatpants, black shoes, and sunglasses came into the station. I took particular notice of him because of the fact he was wearing sunglasses indoors. He walked casually up to the counter with a warm smile on his face and rested his arms on the counter. My mom noticed him as well and gave him the short, hey smile that you give strangers when you don't want to start a conversation. He didn't notice and looked over at the cashier. This is when things went south, real quick. The man playfully smacked the counter and said in a friendly tone, "Give me all your money." The cashier looked at him confused, since the man acted like he knew the cashier. The guy gave the cashier a few seconds before becoming serious, slamming his hands on the counter, pulling out a gun, and demanding money again. This time he was serious, and his demand was no longer a joke. My mom began to drag me out of the store, while I stared in confusion and almost awe at what was happening before me. She threw me into the car, not literally, but you know what I'm getting at, and quickly sped out of the parking lot. The last thing I saw of the gas station was the man putting his gun to the back of the cashier's head and yelling something inaudible to him. It's been 7 years now since this incident, and gas stations still give me a nervous, angsty vibe. Last I saw and heard, the QT had been torn down, and a new building erected in its place. I know, not the dramatic, chaotic ending some of you might have hoped for, but it was still a scary and traumatic experience for me, so I thought I might share it and see if anyone else has experienced the same or knows anything more about the incident.
I'm a 23-year-old female from the UK. When I was 18, I lived very close to a Starbucks coffee shop. It was only about 15 minutes away on foot. During this time, I had pretty bad anxiety issues due to trauma, and part of my therapy treatment was to go out for walks on my own when it was a little dark outside. I wouldn't put myself in dangerous situations or do anything stupid, but I had to get over my irrational fear of being alone outside at night. It's important to note that this story takes place when it was about 9 p.m. in the late summer months. I can't really remember if it was July or August, but it was right around that time. I guess around the time it is now. It didn't get dark until about 10:30 to 11 p.m. Anyway, the Starbucks closed at 8 p.m., and right behind it where the car park was, there was a small hotel and a gas station next to it. There was also a gas station across the street which sort of rivaled the other one. This is relevant to the story. I don't want to name the hotel or gas stations for privacy reasons, just in case someone could sleuth and figure out where this took place. I was out for a walk, and I wanted to challenge myself to stay out until at least 9:30 p.m., then I'd walk home. I don't have a lot of mobile data on my phone, but the Starbucks provided free Wi-Fi even when closed. So I ended up in one of the seating areas outside so that I could scroll through social media on my phone, and it made me feel calmer since I felt apprehensive about being out at night on my own. I sat there for a while, just minding my own business. Now, the car park was deserted. The gas station was close by and obviously had cars pulling in and out, but the customers over there couldn't see me because of the layout of everything around me. I was on my phone when suddenly I heard a loud shouting coming from the hotel. I looked up, and it was like my brain couldn't comprehend what was happening, because I sat there frozen as I watched two older men hanging out their window shouting at me. It took me a second to understand what the hell was happening, and I was horrified. They were screaming at me, trying to get my attention, saying things like,
"Hey! Why don't you come over here, baby?"
Like I said, I have major anxiety issues about being out at night, especially on my own, and I was really trying to resolve those issues. I was so scared that I immediately grabbed my rucksack and got up, not even tucking the chair back into the table that I'd sat at, and I started speed walking out of the car park towards the gas station. One of the men disappeared, and the other screamed at me,
"You need to come up to our room."
After hearing this, my heart was pounding. I immediately called a family member, and I was almost crying from fear. I was only 18 years old. Yes, I was considered an adult in my country, but I still felt like a dumb teenager in a lot of ways. As a female, being accosted by these men who were insulting me and then demanding I come up to their room, well, I just knew they clearly had very bad intentions. I didn't go into the gas station because I felt unsafe, and I decided to cross the street to the other side and then go into the station over there instead. This was because my mom actually worked there, and I felt much safer going to her, where I knew she and her colleagues could protect me. The relative I was on the phone with told me to call the police, but I was way too afraid to hang up the phone, and I begged her to stay on the line with me. She agreed and tried to calm me down, telling me to go across the street. When I was crossing, I looked behind me, and the men were now following me. I couldn't believe what was happening. They looked to be in their late 20s, early 30s, and I definitely looked my age, if not younger. I took off running, not even caring if I got hit by a car, because I just knew I had to get the fuck away from them. I didn't dare look behind me, just in case they were running after me. I flew into the gas station and immediately ran to the cash register, and I then told my mom what was happening. One of the people working with her that night was a man who I'll call Jason. Jason was really stocky and tall, built like a tank, as it's commonly called in my country. My mom ushered me into the bathroom and told me to stay there and lock the door. Jason heard everything, and he ran out the door and into the forecourt to find the men. I was crying in relief now because I finally felt safe. My mom and a lady she worked with had tried to comfort me. Jason came back in after a few minutes, and he said the men had ran away as soon as they saw him coming. I really don't know what those men intended to do. Following me into a place people would see them seems really stupid on their part, but I know they had very bad intentions. Jason walked my mom and I home, and we never saw the men again. I assumed they just went back to the hotel. After that experience, I didn't want it to be a setback, so a week later, I walked back to that Starbucks at 9 p.m. and stood looking at the hotel. I knew that the men would have likely moved on by that point, and I needed to do that to prove to myself that I would be okay. I've dealt with my anxiety issues now, and I'm glad this experience didn't make it worse for me. It was really terrifying at the time, and I still think about it sometimes. I just know they had something horrific planned for me. I wonder just how long they watched me sitting on my phone. I'm now always aware of my surroundings, and I never get so immersed in anything that I lose sight of those around me. For all I know, they could have watched me the whole time. They could have snuck up on me, grabbed me, and done God knows what. I was really lucky they were dumbasses and decided to scream at me instead. Please stay safe, everyone, and don't make the same mistake I did. Always be aware of your surroundings. And if you find yourself in a scary situation, don't panic. Go to somewhere safe and call the police. You never know where the predators are lurking.
I work at a gas station in New Zealand, and despite the downside of dealing with difficult customers, I have genuinely always loved my job. The station I started at has a lot of homeless people or individuals who are struggling financially, even if they do have a home. One homeless man in particular has become my stalker. When I first started, my coworkers informed me that this man would come in and we would give him a free cup of hot water, which he would add some sugar sachets to. They mentioned that he's a bit strange but generally harmless, except for his tendency to swear frequently. Since he was homeless, I felt sorry for him, especially during the winter when I first heard about him, so I happily provided him with his water. However, this man wouldn't just take the water and leave. He would go on rants about all sorts of nonsense, and I could never understand what he was talking about. He used the F word every other word and spoke gibberish in between. Some of my coworkers stopped serving him as he disturbed other customers, but one other coworker and I continued to do so. Looking back, this is probably where the problem started, because he began only coming in when I was working alone. I worked from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m., and he would always show up at night. He never came on my days off, which varied each week, so he must have observed and noted my work schedule by passing by during the day, which I noticed him doing often. Over time, I started feeling uncomfortable with his presence and the way he looked at me. However, being raised in a Christian family, I was reluctant to turn him away. My grandfather always told me as a child, "Manners are cheap, and never turn your back on charity." So I continued to serve him. But then he started making comments about my appearance, then my body, and he stopped asking for water. He just wanted me. He would come in, head straight towards me, and linger in the store for what felt like hours. The final straw came when he winked at me and said I always had a friend in him. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. So I decided to stop letting him in. The moment I was working alone, I locked the doors because I knew he would appear. The problem was, I knew he was watching me. I could sense it, and as soon as the last customer left the forecourt, he would approach the doors. I caught him watching me multiple times a day from alleyways and bushes. We got him trespassed, hoping it would solve the issue. Unfortunately, it didn't. He would still watch me, try to get in, and yell at me through the doors when I refused to let him in. I called the police every time he showed up, but he managed to escape each time. This went on for months on end. I was scared 24/7 at work and even had nightmares at home. There were countless incidents of harassment, attempted entries, and sightings of him watching me. But the worst one occurred when I was on forecourt duty, filling cars and cleaning the pumps. We have speakers at all pumps that are connected to an intercom inside, allowing us to communicate with customers without having to run outside. It's a large site with 12 pumps. While I was outside, I heard my coworker call me inside through the speakers, her voice filled with panic. Since it was daytime, my initial thought was that a customer was causing trouble. I quickly went inside and immediately heard the doors lock behind me. "Look over there by the bushes," she said with wide eyes. I turned to look, and there he was, peering in. The scariest part? He had one foot lunged forward, as if he was ready to run and attack the moment the doors opened. My heart sank, and I called the police, who arrived remarkably quickly. They were already there as I hung up the phone. The officer taking my statement informed me that he would be charged with criminal harassment, and a restraining order was in place. However, legally they had to issue a warning before he could be arrested, and he was released the same night. But enough was enough. I couldn't handle it anymore. I was constantly terrified. It wasn't a matter of if he would return, but when. The very next day, I handed in my 2 weeks' notice. Management didn't want to lose me and offered me a transfer to a site far away where he would never find me, or so we thought. I accepted the transfer, and the new site was great. All the staff were instructed not to disclose my new location to anyone, including the regular customers. They were told to say that I no longer worked for the company. For about 3 months, everything was peaceful. There was no sign of my stalker, and I felt safe. I no longer had to constantly look over my shoulder. However, the relief didn't last long. Just a month ago, the officer handling my case informed me that I had to appear in court and testify against him. I was terrified of seeing him again, but I convinced myself it was for the best. I had just come to terms with the fact that I could do it, and I would ensure he was held accountable. But then the worst happened. He found me at the new site. I don't know how he did it. but my best guess is that he asked a new employee at my old site, someone who wasn't aware of him, the stalking and the restraining order, and they told him. He must have taken a bus or made a remarkably long walk. He was approaching the doors quickly when I spotted him, and I ran away in a panic. I nearly knocked over my boss, who saw the fear on my face and asked what was wrong. In my state of shock and fear, I can't even remember what I said, but my manager locked us in her office and provided incredible support. She called the police and handled everything. I was trembling and in shock. We all believed I was safe at the new site, as the police officer in charge had assured us he would never find me there. While we were on the phone with the police, we witnessed him circling the site at least 3 times before the police arrived, apprehended him, and placed him under arrest. Thank God. Needless to say, I couldn't sleep for the next few days as I waited for the court date. The fear of him being released was overwhelming. 2 days before the court hearing, I prayed. I prayed that he would be convicted and that I would be safe. I honestly had no idea what I would do if he was released and knew where to find me again. This might sound dramatic, but anyone who has experienced the trauma of being stalked will understand. I even made the comment, "If he gets away, I think I'll kill myself." I genuinely felt that hopeless. Thankfully, my prayers were answered the next day when the officer handling my case called me. "I've got some good news. He changed his plea to guilty." I was at work, and I jumped up and down in front of customers. This is the safest I have felt in nearly a year, which has been the longest year of my life. But for now, it's over. Well, mostly. I have a sentencing case coming up, where the duration of his sentence will be determined. But for now, I can finally relax, knowing this monster is off the streets and, most importantly, unable to come near me. Deep down, I know it's not truly over. My gut tells me that when he's released, he'll come back. This man is obsessed and mentally ill. The only thing keeping me going is the saying, "Don't borrow trouble before it shows up at your doorstep." But that's the problem. I know he'll be back at my doorstep as soon as he can. Last night, my boyfriend and I were driving home from Universal Studios in Orlando. We were rerouted a way home we've never went before, and we're traveling in basically the middle of nowhere. My boyfriend's speedometer is broken on his car, and he has to press the button to reset the miles after he gets gas. This will be very important soon. We were driving on a deserted road in the middle of absolute nowhere without a single car in sight. My boyfriend realized we hit the 130-mile mark on his odometer. We needed gas, but there was literally not one gas station in sight. I put search gas stations nearby, and we found one. It turned out to be closed. In a hurry, we found another gas station 5 minutes up the road. This is where the story gets weird. My boyfriend thought he closed his gas cap and we're once again driving along this deserted road. We heard a loud bang and he realized he forgot to put the gas cap back on, so we're driving around this dark road looking for the gas cap. He finally pulls over and realizes somehow the gas cap is still attached to the car. We get back on track to the other gas station. Out of nowhere, I had a horrible thought about something going wrong at that gas station. I pushed it aside because I knew we needed gas and AAA is not an option where we were at the moment. We get to this gas station and the lights are kind of on. This road literally leads to a dead end with a gas station on it. The only way to leave this area was to turn left or go straight out of the gas station. My boyfriend got out of the car to see if we could get gas and the feeling intensified. I have literally never felt like that in my life. My stomach dropped into my butt. I have been in very disturbing situations such as almost being kidnapped twice, being followed home, watching someone be taken away in a body bag after being hit by a car, and even a paranormal situation. But I have never felt like this before. I saw a white car pulling up to the road to make a left. Keep in mind, there is literally no one on this road. He pulls up and notices my boyfriend and backs up with his windows down. I found this very strange because my boyfriend has a very nice sports car, and my mind immediately went into panic mode. I started screaming his name, and the man realized that someone else was in the car, turned left and sped off. Sadly, I didn't get his license plate because of how dark it was. This situation frightened me more than you can even imagine. It may not seem too scary, but it was easily one of the most terrifying things to watch, because I didn't know if I was going to witness my boyfriend being robbed at gunpoint or something like that. The feeling and thought I had just 10 minutes earlier is what also made the situation even worse. We found a gas station with actual human life around, and we made it home safe and sound. Once I got home, my dad told me that the road we were driving on was famous for the many bodies being found on it. I hope no one ever gets put into this situation. And to the man who was planning to do something to my boyfriend, let's never meet.
This happened to me when I was 19. For some context, I'm a guy. I was working at my overnight job at a 24-hour gas station, and it was about 1 in the morning, and I was just sitting at the register minding my own business when this guy walks in. He approached the counter, and he had asked for a guy that he knows. Keep in mind, I know that guy as well. I know the guy that came up to the counter is a former classmate that I graduated with, and I told him the guy he was asking for wasn't there. He said that I was lying. Then he took out a gun and pointed it right at me. He then told me to tell him where he's at, or he's opening fire. I once again told him that he wasn't here. Then he actually came behind the counter and put the gun right up to my head, then saying,
"Tell me where he is, or you die."
Also, keep in mind that the guy who had the gun to my head was someone from school that everyone couldn't stand. I was just frozen. I didn't know what to do. I told him for the 3rd time that he wasn't here and that I don't know where the hell he's at. My heart was racing to what felt like 1,000,000 miles a second. Then thankfully, a cop walked inside the gas station surprisingly, and then screamed at the guy to drop the gun and step away with his hands up. The guy was arrested. After this happened, I immediately ran to the bathroom to take the biggest shit I probably ever have in my life. I know that's not the point, but I felt such relief after it was all over. After I finished up in the bathroom, I went to the counter and I thanked the officer for taking care of that guy. My boss saw how scared I was, and they said I could leave for the night if I wanted to for my safety. So that's what I did. I clocked out, and I then went home safe and sound. I quit that job the very next day. I told the guy from school about our classmate with the gun and what happened. He was really glad that I didn't tell him where he was, because apparently they had some really bad blood. Needless to say, I'm never working overnights again.
One of the most chilling moments of my whole life was while working at 7-Eleven. Some guy walks in wearing a suit, staggers over to one of the fridges and grabs a ton of those Starbucks cold brews out of one of them before dumping them all on the counter in front of me. The stink of booze off of him was just wild, and as I'm ringing him up, I asked if he'd either had a really good day or a really bad one. He's let out this really hearty laugh and then tells me, "A little of both." He then goes on to explain that he'd just gotten out of court, and that he's been acquitted of accidentally shooting one of his hunting buddies on a trip that happened a few years ago. I was so stunned that I didn't really know what to say. I just went with the first thing that came to mind, which was, "I'm sorry." He laughs again, shakes his head, and then asks me, "You know what the funniest thing is, though?" I shake my head, taking the 10 he gave me before grabbing his change from the register, and when he tells me, I swear I almost dropped his money all over the floor when he spoke. He tells me, "It was no accident." Then just starts laughing to himself while he pockets the change and scoops up all the cold brews from the counter. I was so taken aback that all I could do was just stand there, watching the guy as he walked out of the store and towards his parked car. Then my mind switches to thinking, please get into the passenger seat, please get into the passenger seat. But nope. He climbs right into the driver's side, starts the engine, then drives off. I'm not saying I have a photographic memory or anything, more like I was repeating his license plate number back to myself as I grabbed my phone and plugged it into the Notepad app. Then I called the cops, told them they had a drunk driver on their hands, then just let karma do its thing. There was nothing I could do about him taking one person's life and getting away with it. But I sure wasn't about to stand by and let him kill someone else as the result of being a reckless idiot. One of the worst days of my life came right out of nowhere. I was working at my job at a local 7-Eleven, just burning away the daylight hours with no passion in life, no purpose, no nothing. Then suddenly, I feel this terrible headache coming on. I take a few painkillers, then got back to what I was doing. Some customer comes in, I ring them up for a coffee and a pack of donuts, and then that's the last thing I remember. I woke up in the hospital, and the nurses were prepping me for surgery. I was told I'd been diagnosed with a bleed in my brain and that the surgery would involve drilling a hole in my skull to drain the fluid. Then, just as they were about to put me under, the head of neurology got in touch with someone and called off the surgery completely. What actually happened is that I'd suffered an aneurysm, and according to my doctor, who told me this much later on, I would have probably been dead on the table just seconds after the surgery commenced. With a brain bleed, the solution is to drill holes in your skull, which relieves pressure and prevents your brain from swelling up and squeezing against your skull. If it does that, it can lead to some pretty serious brain damage, which is obviously very bad news. But in the case of an aneurysm, which is what is actually going on, that kind of surgery can prevent sufficient blood flow to your brain due to the sharp drop in blood pressure in your brain tissue. This then basically starves your brain of oxygen, leading to acute tissue death, which obviously just straight up kills you. That head of neurology legitimately saved my life that day, and the whole thing dramatically changed my outlook on life. A person can still feel perfectly healthy, perfectly normal, and then one little weak blood vessel in your brain and boom, it can all be over for them. Life is a terrifyingly fragile thing, one that can really just end at any moment. I quit my job at the 7-Eleven when I was recovering in the hospital, then asked my dad and mom if they could put me up in my old bedroom while I trained to be a comic book artist. They thought my choice of career was a little outlandish, and I don't blame them, but I think the shock of almost losing me to some random medical thing made them reevaluate a few things too. These days, I work as a full-time comic book artist, and although I don't make a ton of money, I feel like I'm actually living the life I want to, the one I was supposed to live, not one that's being dictated to me by my need for money or prestige or acceptance. I suppose I'm telling you all this because I hope everyone on Earth can live that way too, and it honestly breaks my heart that some people don't have a choice in the matter, because the idea that someone's life could just end while they were working some terrible retail job or doing just about anything they didn't want to do, I don't just find it heartbreaking, I find the concept utterly terrifying. Probably because I was just one surgery away from that exact same thing happening to me.
My name is Emily, and I'm currently 20 years old, but the story happened to me when I was about 14 to 15. Me and my family took a road trip one weekend to a mall about 2 hours away from my hometown. It was my mom, grandmother, brother, and myself. The mall was located in a smaller town in Georgia, and we had visited many times before. During this time in my life, I really wanted to be able to go off on my own. So I split up from my family at the time and decided to go into Claire's. If you don't know what Claire's is, it's basically a jewelry store for mainly younger/adolescent girls. This'll be important for later. I walked inside and started browsing around the store. After about 2 to 3 minutes into looking around the store, I noticed an older man looking at some headbands and other girlish things. I wanted to look at them as well, and so I walked over and stood about 6 feet away from him. I've been listening to scary stories since I was young, so in my mind, I thought it was odd that he was here by himself. I mean, I was expecting his daughter to come up or someone else to be with him. As we were standing there for a while, not one person ever approached him. The man then turns to me and he asks about which ones I like the best, and I gave him my honest opinion. I think that he mentioned something about shopping for his daughter, so I tried to help him the best that I could. I originally had an uneasy feeling about him being there alone, but since he said he was shopping for his daughter as a surprise, I really tried to shake the uneasy feeling I had. I started moving away from him to other sections of the store, just looking at everything, and I noticed he would move to every section I went to and would continue to ask me questions. He eventually asked something along the lines of where I was from, and I tried my best to just give him a vague answer. I mean, I don't want some random older man knowing where I lived, even if we were far away from home. I kept moving around the store to kind of see if he would just check out and leave already, but he just continued to browse the store. I eventually checked my phone to a couple of missed calls and texts from my mom, so I texted her back and decided to leave. I knew that she was in the next building over, so as I walked out of the door and into the right, I suddenly saw my mom. She was walking right towards me, so I smiled. I suddenly saw the happy expression leave her face. I can't really describe the expression it had afterwards, as I'd never seen my mom look like that before. She started talking to me as we were walking to the store where my grandmother and brother were. Once we were inside, my mom then told me and my family that she had a really bad feeling, and that's why she called and texted me so many times. And after a few minutes with no response from me, she decided to head over to Claire's to check on me. I just so happened to walk out when she was coming over. My mom went on to say that as soon as I walked out of the door, the man who had been following me rushed out of the door after me and looked like he was going to grab me, and that once he saw my mom walking towards me and talking to me, she said the man's expression changed and he looked pale. Before I could even notice what happened and turned around, she said the man took off. I've never been more grateful for my mom's intuition. I really don't know what could have happened if she didn't come over and meet me when she did. We never called the police about it, and I have no idea if he ever did anything to anyone else. I really wish we could have done something, but he left so quickly, and all my mom was focused on was that I was safe. We always thought that town was safe, so the rest of the trip and subsequent ones, I always stayed really close to my mom. I'm always super cautious when I'm out in public, and I now carry pepper spray and knives. Please protect yourselves, and don't turn away from your gut feelings. They very well may save your life one day.
Several months ago, I sat at a mall food court by myself. I was taking a break from shopping to have something to eat. The mall was very busy, and so was the food court, but I had a lot of shopping to do. I was looking at my phone as I was eating, and out of nowhere, I received a text message. It was not from anyone in my contacts, and the message said, "Hey." I figured that it was a wrong number, and I ignored it. But they texted me again, probably about a minute later. This time, they said, "I see you." I stopped what I was doing and looked up, checking around the crowded food court. Nobody appeared to be looking at me, though. I was sure that this was still a wrong number. I decided to text the number back, though. I said, "Who is this? I think you might have the wrong number." Very quickly, I got a response saying, "No, I have the right number. I can see you eating right now." This response sent a chill down my spine. This particular mall was not that close to my house, probably almost an hour away. I didn't know of anybody who knew that I was here and would prank me, like a friend or something. Plus, this was a new number that I didn't know. I once again looked all around the immediate area. There had to be hundreds of people, and it could have been anyone. It was basically useless to try and guess who it could be. I texted the number back, asking once again who this was. I didn't get a response after this. Now I wasn't really sure what to do. Was this just some harmless prank, or a creep stalking me? I didn't text them back, and just kept eating and minding my own business. But I looked up and scanned the area every so often, trying to find somebody looking at me. It would be like finding a needle in a haystack, though. A few minutes later, the number tried calling me. My phone was ringing, but I had no interest in talking to them. I declined the call. After that, I decided to leave the area. I walked away to keep shopping. I had quite a bit more to do. For the next several hours, I walked all through the large mall into many different stores. I bought a lot of things, and by the time I was done shopping, I forgot all about the random person texting me. I hadn't received any text since I was in the mall food court. I hadn't been called either. Finally, when I was done shopping, I went to leave the mall. I was within feet of the exit doors when I felt my phone vibrate. I didn't think anything of it and assumed that it was just one of my friends texting me like usual. I took out my phone to check as I approached the doors. The text was from the same unknown person, and it said, "Leaving so soon?" I couldn't believe it. I stopped and looked behind me. There was still a decent amount of people in the mall walking around that I could see. Again, nobody was directly looking at me or anything like that. I still had no clue who it was. I decided there to just leave, and I walked quickly out of the mall. I checked back to the doors to see if anybody followed me outside though. A few people did leave behind me, but there was no way of really knowing. Nobody seemed to follow me to the area of the parking lot where my car was, and I got inside my car quickly and left. I drove back home, which took about an hour. I was 100% sure that I was done with whoever this person was. Still, I had so many questions. How did they get my number? Why were they watching me? And most importantly, who was doing it? I wondered these things the entire drive back, but I still figured that it was all behind me. After getting home, I went inside and put the things away that I had bought. It was at this time when I received another text. This was pretty strange for whoever this was to still be texting me. They said, "Nice house." I thought they had to be joking. Just to be safe though, I walked over to the front window and looked outside. It was nighttime now, and I carefully peeled back the blinds a little. I saw a car slowly driving down the street past my house. The speed that it was traveling was much slower than cars normally would. Plus, my street is usually fairly quiet. There was no doubt in my mind this was the person who had been texting me. Obviously, I couldn't see inside their car, but I could see that the vehicle appeared to be a smaller sized SUV. It drove off out of sight and down the street. I texted back, asking again who was doing this. They didn't respond that time either, which was no surprise. After this, I finally blocked the number. I watched out my window several more times that night, but I never saw the car returning. Since then, nothing like that has happened. I still wonder about it though, and I haven't gotten any answers. Was it some random person stalking me? The fact that they possibly followed me for an hour back to my house just to drive by is really creepy.
When I was 14 years old, my mama dropped me off at the dentist office, which happened to be located inside the closest mall to home. She told me to give her a call when my appointment finished, but I had forgotten to bring my cell phone with me. I wasn't there long, maybe 20 minutes tops. I had no way of calling my mom, so I thought I could ask the receptionist if I was able to use the office phone, but they were using it. So I waited and waited. I waited for 5 to 10 minutes, but to me, it felt like the longest minutes of my life. The phone was still in use when I decided to look for a phone booth in the mall. Now, I wasn't really sure if the mall had any, but it didn't hurt to look, right? Or so I thought. As I walked to the main entrance, where I assumed the public phones would be at, if any, I noticed 3 men walking opposite of me on the other side of the pathway. One of them acknowledged me and tapped on the shoulders of the other 2, then pointed to me, and then whispered something amongst themselves. Red flags immediately went off. That day, the mall was relatively empty, not too much people around to shop, so I made the decision to turn back to the dentist office. Then they crossed over to my side and started to follow me. That's when I panicked. My heart started racing as I picked up my pace. When I reached the turn to the office down the hall, I looked back to see if they would still follow me there. They did. As I got closer, I saw the restrooms on my left and debated whether to go and hide in there, but I noticed they were locked, so I kept walking. I spotted a family sitting on the bench just outside of the office, so I quickly decided to stay next to them as the seats inside the office were completely filled. I then turned to the direction from where I came from to see if the men were still there. They were now standing and smiling at me before walking towards the restrooms out of sight. I knew they weren't actually inside there since they were locked. I waited a few more minutes, but they stayed hiding. I assumed waiting for me to walk by again, but I walked inside of the office to finally make my call and go home. I will never go back to that mall again. Please be aware of your surroundings.
I don't go shopping at malls or things like that very often, but when I do, I tend to buy a lot of things. Clothes, electronics, whatever. There's a decent-sized mall that's maybe 10 minutes away from where I live, and I go there occasionally. The mall has quite a few popular stores, and just about anything you could want to buy. I went there one weekend, and only had a couple of things that I wanted to get for sure. I was open to buying other things, though. As the day went on, I ended up finding quite a few things. I basically shopped all day, and by the time I was done, my arms were full with bags. I stayed at the mall until some of the stores were closing, and then I decided to finally call it a day. I walked back to my car, which I had parked at the top level of the parking garage attached to the mall. When I got inside of the parking garage, things were significantly less busy. There were far less cars, and when I got to the top level where I had parked, I didn't see any other cars at all. In fact, it appeared that my car was the only one parked there. I walked over to it, but when I got within maybe 75 feet, I heard a noise. The car was sort of around a corner, and the noises were coming from out of my view. I kept walking, and when I was maybe 50 feet away, whoever had been making those noises came into view. I saw about 4 or 5 people come around the corner. They walked sort of in front of my car, blocking it. One of the men started walking towards me at that point, and I had a terrible feeling. I knew there were no other cars parked up here, so the men were probably up to no good. Plus, most of them wore dark clothing and sweatshirts with the hoods up. Some of them, I could barely see their face. It was like they were trying to conceal their identities. One of the men held something in his hand, and I couldn't quite tell what it was. With all of my bags in my hands, I turned around and immediately started sprinting for the mall. I ran as fast as I possibly could. One of the men shouted something at me, but I'm not sure what it was because there was a bad echo in there. I don't think they chased me, but I didn't look back to check. I was able to make it back inside the mall, and when I did, I kept walking quickly inside of it. I looked back several times, but I didn't see any of the men. I don't think they followed me into the mall. When I made it back towards the center of the mall, I finally felt safe. There were a few people here and there, although most of the stores inside were closed. I waited there until there was basically nobody else left. Then I decided that I would try to go to my car once more. I made it there, and luckily this time, the men were gone. I still left as quickly as possible. Looking back at that day, I'm sure that they were going to try to rob me for all that I had bought. Probably my money too. I reported the incident on the mall website, but haven't heard back. I'm a female employee of a small shop in a decent-sized mall near where I live. Our store is so small that we only have one employee working at once generally. We're an actual store though, not one of those stands that are in the middle of the walkways. We sell mostly accessories and some shoes as well. So one day I was working and by myself like any other. It was sometime in the afternoon and the mall was pretty busy like usual. However, even when the mall was busy, we usually don't get too many customers. I was the only person in the store, and we hadn't had anybody come in a while. At one point, a man walked inside the store. He casually made his way closer to where I was at the very back center behind the counter. Now, to describe the man, I would say that he was fairly short and thin. He wore a gray shirt and black pants, but they didn't seem to fit him well. He had a pretty bad haircut, to be honest, that was also rather messy. And as he got close to me, I could smell smoke and cigarettes. The man basically tried to pick me up. His method was pretty creepy though. He told me how he had been watching me today and he thought that I was beautiful. I couldn't get past the part where he said he'd been watching me. I don't remember the rest of what he said, but it wasn't much better. I was friendly to the guy until he suggested I leave right then and there and go with him. When I said no, he asked about when I got done, and I declined his offer in the nicest way I could. The man left after that, walking out of the store and going to the right. I thought that was that, only to see the guy reappear about 20 minutes later. He walked by and slowed down significantly to look inside right at me. I ignored this. The guy didn't wave or anything and just walked past. He came back less than an hour after that and pretty much did the same thing, but was farther away. I guess he really had been watching me. It was making me sort of uncomfortable, but as long as he didn't come in the store again, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. There were only a few more customers in the rest of my shift for that day. I tried to ignore what was going on outside, like if the man was walking by or watching me. Things went pretty smoothly for the most part. I ended up getting off of work several hours later. I left the store and started walking down the hallway to the parking garage where I always parked at. It was in the west side of the mall, and it took me maybe 10 minutes to walk there. By this time, the mall was still pretty busy, and there were people all over the place. As I was walking, I made it no more than 100 feet before glancing behind me and seeing the same man again. It was a terrible feeling, knowing that he was still there and he most likely saw me. I kept walking towards the exits, checking back every so often, and each time that I did, not only was the man still following me, but he was slightly closer than before. There was still a number of people between us, but this guy was going to catch up with me eventually. What he planned on doing when he did, I had no idea. I decided to turn at a spot I didn't normally to try and throw the man off. He kept following me there. The thought occurred to me that I could find a mall security guard and tell them about the situation. The only problem was that it was hard to predict where in the mall the security guards would be. We had a decent number of them, but as busy as our mall got, many of them might not be available at once. I walked around trying to find somebody, with the man still trailing me a ways back. This went on for several minutes with no luck. I went down probably 3 or 4 different walkways and saw hundreds of people, but none of them were a security guard. I decided then to just leave. There were so many people that I had to be able to lose the man if I tried hard enough. I began walking faster and more erratic. I got some strange looks from people as I did, but I didn't even care. I went in one of the bigger stores that had a lot of customers in it and saw the man enter not long after me. I went up and down a few aisles of the store and then quickly walked out. Once I was out, I turned a corner extremely fast and then didn't notice the man after me. I had finally lost him. Still, I walked a ways further just to be safe. When I was sure that I had lost him, I finally started going out to my car. I made my way through the rest of the mall, which took a while because I was on the complete other side now. I was very careful and checked for the man over and over. I didn't see him at all though. At last, I had made it out into the parking garage. As I was walking to my car, suddenly I saw the guy again. He was a pretty far ways away and wasn't looking at me. I quickly walked into the opposite direction, which is where my car was. I walked as fast as I could and finally made it to my vehicle. I wasted no time and got in, started the engine, and drove off. Luckily, I wasn't followed by the guy. I was able to make it home safely. I had the next few days off, and when I worked again, I didn't notice him at all. I haven't seen him since, and I'm hoping that I don't. When I saw the man in the parking garage, I actually think that it was a coincidence. He didn't seem to notice me, and he wasn't by my car either. Still, I will never forget the creepy feeling when I saw him there.
I'm a 16-year-old female, but at the time of the story, I had just turned 14. And with this, was just starting to get some freedom and trust to be more independent. The story I'm going to share is something me and my best friend experienced together. Like I said before, we were getting trusted to do more things on our own, like going to the mall and stuff. Me and my friend Aileen had gone to the mall together all by ourselves. She and I had been running around the store carelessly and had been having a great time when we wanted to stop by for the photo booth. So me and her go sit in there, and after we take the pictures, I tell her that I'm going to go throw away something. The nearest trash can was about 30 feet away, I think. So I walk towards the trash can, and I see these 5 guys standing by it. They looked to be around the ages of 18 to 20. I had noticed them looking at me, and so I smiled at them before walking away, not giving it another thought, and we just keep going around in the mall. Over the span of about an hour, I see them about 5 to 7 times, but I just thought it was a coincidence. Well, me and Aileen take a short break, and we sit down on a bench in between the stores, just talking. We see the boys yet again, but this time much closer to us. They're kinda just walking around in slow circles all around us. I wasn't paying much attention to them, but that's what it seemed like. Well, after a few minutes of this, one of them comes up to me and starts speaking Spanish to me. I speak Spanish as well, so it wasn't that hard to communicate and see what he wanted. He went on to tell me just how beautiful my big blue eyes are, and I just said thank you. He kept giving me compliments about my appearance, and I just kind of looked at my friend, giving her that "we really need to leave" look. The guy starts asking for my Instagram, and I'm more than uncomfortable at this point, so I just tell him no thank you. He keeps pushing for it and inching closer to us. After he gets that I'm not giving him my Insta, he opens up Snapchat and he asks for my Snap, and again, I just tell him no. He keeps pushing it and asking for different social medias as well as my number. I'm getting really overwhelmed at this point. I then stand up and I get in his face, telling him, "No, I'm not giving you shit." And at this, he seems to get the hint, but he moves on to Aileen to do the same exact thing, asking for her socials. I didn't even let him finish a sentence before I then yell at him to leave us alone. I then grab Aileen and we speed walk away. I was beyond mortified. I told Aileen that we needed to tell her parents about it when they go pick us up, but she kept saying it wasn't a big deal and to drop it, so I did. I noticed those guys a few more times on the way out of the store and in the parking lot waiting for Aileen's parents to come get us. I even got a little worried that they were following us, but I'm sure that was just in my head. When I finally got home, I told my mom about it. She went on to explain to me that things like this will just happen to young women, and I need to be careful. This next part really freaks me out. I don't remember how I got this piece of information. I think my mom told me, but I somehow found out that there was a sex trafficking ring all around that mall. My mom had told me that those guys were probably a part of it, and that she was really proud of me for not giving them my socials. As if I'd be stupid enough to do that. But anyway, that's my story. To all the young women and men out there, do not give your socials or anything else to any stranger who asks. Always tell your parents about the situation and let them handle it.
I'm a female, and I work at a clothing store at a mall, and this is something that happened over the summer. I started work at 12 p.m. and was working a closing shift. The mall is open until 9 p.m., but our store closed at 8 on that particular day. It was a Saturday, so the mall was really busy. We got a lot of customers throughout the store, and I was busy basically the whole time. When things started to get interesting, though, was at about 4 p.m. I remember that I was working at one of the 4 registers that we had, ringing up customers. A woman who I was helping told me that she wanted to let me know that there was a guy in the store that was acting creepy and suspicious. I told the woman thanks for letting us know, and when I was done helping her, I notified another employee. I wasn't quite sure what she meant by creepy and suspicious, but I knew that it wasn't good. And the description of the man was a white male with a green sweatshirt and jeans about average height. I glanced around the store, but I couldn't see all areas from where I was, plus the many racks and displays of clothing that we had everywhere didn't allow me to see all the customers, and I didn't see the man. Not even 5 minutes later, though, I got another complaint. Another woman said that a guy in a green sweatshirt seemed to be following her around the store. When I was done helping her, I decided to go find this guy and ask him what he was doing. I left the counter and started walking around the store. Eventually, I saw him near the back corner. He made eye contact with me for a brief second before looking away. As soon as he saw me walking towards him, he turned around and started walking towards the exit. Then he left. I figured he must have gotten the message without me having to say anything, and he knew he was doing something wrong and was going to get kicked out. I was glad he was gone, so hopefully no more of our customers would be bothered. And for the rest of my shift, everything went great. Things quieted down significantly after 7 p.m., and it was very calm for the final hour of work before getting off. There were 3 of us employees working, and at 8 o'clock the other 2 went home, and I stayed back to do a few things. We closed the store by sliding the metal barrier from both sides of the store opening. My last job of the day was to go around the store and make sure that everything was relatively in order. It would usually only take me about 10 or 15 minutes or so. I would go around, sweep the floor, pick up garbage, and if any items were out of place or looking sloppy, I would fix them. Things were taking a bit longer because it had been a Saturday, so there were more things messed up than usual. I started in the front and then made my way to the back. When I was almost done, and at the very back of the store, I was looking through one of the clothing racks, and for some reason, I looked across to the other end. I was looking at the other back corner of the store, and then I noticed something. There was a man hiding behind a clothing display inside another rack of clothes, sort of looking out. I could just barely tell that he was wearing green. I realized that it was the same guy that had been here before in that moment. Thankfully, he wasn't looking at me. My heart started racing, but I tried my best to act normal. That corner of the store that he was in was the only section of the store that I hadn't yet cleaned or organized, and I was going to do it next. I sure wasn't going to do it anymore, though. After I finished organizing the rack of clothes that I casually walked over to the front end of the store. When I got there, I stopped and texted the mall security number. I hoped that they would have a quick response. I felt like I shouldn't leave the store because I was the only employee there, but I really wanted to. I stayed right by the front, about as far away as I could get from the guy. Soon, though, I heard a noise coming from the back of the store. As soon as I did, I ran to the gate and opened it, sliding it open just enough for me to get out, and then pushing it shut behind me. When I did, I just barely saw the man coming into view. I walked to the business next door and saw a security guard walking towards me from down the hallway. I waved him over, and in that same time, saw out of the corner of my eye behind me the man leaving the store that I worked at. I pointed at him, and basically the security guard had to chase the guy down. He did end up getting caught, and I had to make a report. I was just happy to be okay, though. Looking back at that, I'm so glad I saw the man when I did, because it's really creepy to think how he was hiding in the store alone with me as I was working.